The crack of splintering wood echoed across the valley as Harrison Blackwood's men tore through the Sullivan Ranch's stable. Their axes and sledgehammers rose and fell in a brutal rhythm, destroying in minutes what had taken months to build. Blackwood himself sat atop his gleaming black stallion, watching the demolition with the detached interest of a man observing ants at work. His tailored suit and polished boots stood in stark contrast to the dusty work clothes of his hired men. From her position behind a cluster of pines half a mile away, Margaret Sullivan Maggie, to those who knew her, pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sound that was part sob, part rage. The other hand cradled her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant, with the child who would never know their father. The cold metal of Patrick's pocket watch pressed against her palm, where she clutched it, the last tangible piece of her husband. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to her unborn child. "But I swear to you, it won't be the end." Blackwood dismounted with fluid grace, his movements those of a man accustomed to command. He strode to the front of the property where one of his men was hammering a sign into the ground. Even from her distant vantage point, Maggie could make out the bold letters, "Property foreclosed." The ranch that had been her home, her dream, her future, now declared another man's property with the swing of a hammer. Blackwood's voice carried across the open space, confident and cutting. 3 days, boys. If the widow Sullivan isn't gone by then, remove her. I don't care how." The casual cruelty of his words sent a chill through Maggie that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. Her fingers tightened around Patrick's watch, the metal warming against her skin. "We're not leaving," she whispered to her child. "This is our home, your father's legacy." As Blackwood and his men mounted up to leave, Maggie remained hidden, watching as they rode toward Millbrook, the dust from their horses' hooves settling on what had once been the pride of the Sullivan family. Only when they disappeared from sight did she allow herself to move each step, careful and measured, mindful of the precious life she carried. The ranch house stood empty and forlorn, most of the furniture already taken by creditors in the weeks following Patrick's death. The accident that had claimed his life had been suspicious from the start. Patrick Sullivan had been raised around horses since childhood. The idea that he had been thrown and broken his neck during a routine ride strained credibility, but the town doctor had signed the death certificate without question. Another man in Blackwood's pocket, Maggie suspected. She couldn't stay at the ranch house anymore. Blackwood's men would return, and she had no doubt they'd make good on their employer's threat. Instead, she gathered the few possessions that remained clothing: Patrick's journals, their marriage certificate, and the deed to the property that the creditors had somehow overlooked. The small bundle looked pitiful, the sum total of 8 years of marriage and hard work. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Maggie took one last look at the home she'd shared with Patrick. Their dreams had been simple: a prosperous ranch, children running through the fields growing old together, on land they'd worked with their own hands. Now half those dreams lay buried with Patrick, and the other half hung by a thread as slender as hope. "I'll be back," she promised the silent house. "This isn't over." The 2-mile walk to Millbrook taxed Maggie's strength more than she'd anticipated. Her pregnancy had been difficult from the start, morning sickness lasting well into the afternoon for months. Now, with her center of gravity shifted by her growing child, each step required careful consideration. By the time she reached the outskirts of town, sweat dampened her collar, despite the cool evening air. Millbrook had once been a boom town during the gold rush of '67, but like many such settlements, it had withered when the claims proved less lucrative than hoped. Now it existed in a strange limbo, not quite ghost town, not quite thriving community. The main street boasted the Essentials General Store blacksmith post office, And, of course, the Blackwood Saloon, the most imposing structure in town, with its painted facade and large windows that glowed with lamplight as dusk settled. Maggie kept her head down as she passed the saloon, conscious of the stares that followed her. A pregnant widow was an object of both pity and speculation in a town like Millbrook. Some whispered that Patrick's death had been convenient, occurring just as the ranch's debts mounted. Others claimed Blackwood had engineered the whole situation to acquire the Sullivan land. Maggie had her own suspicions, but suspicions weren't proof, and proof was what she needed. At the far end of town, set slightly apart from the other buildings, stood a modest house with a small garden of medicinal herbs. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the windows glowed with warm light. Unlike the other structures in Millbrook, which bore the weathered look of neglect, this house was meticulously maintained, its porch swept clean, its fence mended. Before Maggie could knock, the door swung open to reveal Clara Wu, a small woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a tight bun. Despite her age, she stood straight-backed and alert, her dark eyes missing nothing. "I've been expecting you," Clara said, her slight accent lending her words a musical quality. "Come in, before you fall down Margaret Sullivan." The interior of Clara's home reflected its owner's dual heritage. Traditional Chinese artwork hung alongside American landscapes. A shelf displayed both porcelain figurines and carved wooden animals. The scent of herbal medicine mingled with the aroma of fresh-baked bread. "Sit," Clara commanded, guiding Maggie to a chair near the hearth. "You shouldn't walk so far in your condition." "I didn't have much choice," Maggie replied, the exhaustion she'd been fighting finally breaking through. "Blackwood's men came today. They're tearing down the stable. He's given me 3 days to leave." Clara's expression hardened. "That man, a disease on this town." She busied herself preparing tea, the movements precise and practiced. "You will stay here. I have room." It wasn't a question, and Maggie felt gratitude swell in her chest. Clara Wu was one of the few people in Millbrook who had shown her kindness after Patrick's death. The Chinese woman had arrived in town 15 years earlier with her husband, who had worked on the Transcontinental Railroad. When he died of fever 5 years ago, Clara had remained supporting herself by offering traditional healing services to those willing to look beyond prejudice for relief from ailments that conventional medicine couldn't touch. "I can't pay you," Maggie said, her voice catching. "Not yet, but once I—" Clara waved away her words. "Money is not important now. Life is important." She glanced pointedly at Maggie's belly. 2 lives. The tea Clara pressed into Maggie's hands was fragrant and unfamiliar, but surprisingly comforting. As she sipped, Maggie felt some of the day's tension begin to ease from her shoulders. "How did you know I was coming?" she asked, curiosity temporarily displacing worry. A ghost of a smile crossed Clara's face. "When a wolf burns a fox's den, where does the fox go to another fox numb? To those the wolf has also harmed." She set a plate of bread and preserves before Maggie. "Eat, then rest. Tomorrow is soon enough for plans." Maggie ate mechanically, her mind still at the ranch, still seeing Blackwood's men destroying her home piece by piece. When she finished, Clara showed her to a small but clean room at the back of the house. A narrow bed with fresh linens stood against one wall, a washstand and mirror against another. "Sleep," Clara instructed. "Baby needs strength. Mother, too." Left alone, Maggie sank onto the bed, her body grateful for the rest, while her mind continued to race. From her pocket, she withdrew Patrick's last letter written just days before his death. The paper had grown soft from frequent handling, the creases threatening to tear. "My dearest Maggie, I know you're worried about the bank's threats, but trust me when I say I've taken precautions. There's a gift for you hidden in Grandfather Sullivan's pocket watch, the one thing I pray they won't take from us. It may seem small, but it's the key to everything. This land is ours, truly. Ours in ways that Blackwood and his kind will never understand. Land belongs to those who work. It care for it, love it, not to those who merely possess the papers that claim ownership. I'll explain everything when I return from town tomorrow. Keep faith, my love. Our child will inherit more than just dirt and grass. They'll inherit justice. Forever yours, Patrick. Patrick had never returned to explain. His body had been brought back the next day, the victim of a broken neck from a fall that experienced riders simply didn't take. The pocket watch had been in his vest, overlooked by whoever had gone through his possessions before returning his body. With trembling fingers, Maggie opened the watch's case. She had examined it dozens of times since Patrick's death, finding nothing unusual. The mechanism ticked steadily. The engraved interior displayed the Sullivan family crest. But there was no hidden compartment, no secret message that she could discern. Tonight, however, desperation made her more thorough. She ran her fingertips along every surface, pressed every part that might move. Finally, she noticed a slight unevenness in the metal backing. Applying pressure in just the right spot caused a thin panel to slide open, revealing a tightly folded piece of paper. Her heart hammering, Maggie carefully extracted the hidden note. The paper was high-quality vellum, the kind used for official documents. Written in Patrick's neat hand were the cryptic words, "Land belongs to those who work it. B&B 1869. She turned the paper over, searching for more, but found only those 9 words, and the mysterious notation. What had Patrick meant? What was B&B 1869? And how was this small note supposed to help her against Blackwood's legal machinery? Outside, an owl called into the night, its mournful cry matching Maggie's confusion. She tucked the note back into its hiding place in the watch and placed it carefully on the nightstand. Whatever Patrick had intended, she would decipher it. She had to for herself, for their unborn child, and for the memory of the man she had loved. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of Patrick riding away, always just beyond her reach, calling back words she couldn't quite hear. 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Maggie spent them recovering her strength under Clara's watchful care, eating the nourishing food the older woman prepared, and drinking the herbal teas that seemed to ease the constant backache of late pregnancy. Clara asked no questions about Maggie's plans, offering instead quiet companionship and practical advice about the baby's impending arrival. On the 3rd day, hunger of a different sort gnawed at Maggie, the need to see what had become of her home. Despite Clara's protests, she made her way to the edge of town, where a rise in the land offered a view of the Sullivan Ranch in the distance. What she saw stopped her breath. Where her home had stood now lay a pile of charred timber. Blackwood's men hadn't merely evicted her. They had burned the house to the ground. 8 years of memories, hopes, and dreams reduced to ash and smoke that still rose in thin tendrils against the blue Montana sky. Grief rose in her throat, threatening to choke her. The baby kicked forcefully as if sensing her distress, and Maggie pressed a hand to her belly in reflexive comfort. "I'm sorry," she whispered, unsure whether she was addressing her child or Patrick's memory. "I'm so sorry." As she stood frozen by the sight of destruction, the rumble of approaching horses broke her trance. Instinctively, she stepped behind a large boulder, making herself as small as possible. A party of riders crested the hill, Blackwood at their head, his figure unmistakable even at a distance. They stopped to survey the smoldering ruins, and Maggie heard Blackwood's laugh carry on the wind. "Perfect," he called to his men. "Now we can start with a clean slate. Begin surveying tomorrow. I want the new boundaries marked by the end of the week." The casual way he discussed erasing all traces of the Sullivan Ranch sent a wave of fury through Maggie that burned hotter than any fire. In that moment, grief crystallized into resolve. Blackwood had taken her home, but he hadn't taken her determination. Patrick had left her a clue, a way forward, and she would decipher it if it was the last thing she did. She waited until Blackwood and his men disappeared from view before making her way back to town. Her mind worked furiously, turning over the mysterious message again and again. B&B, 1869. What had Patrick been trying to tell her? The main street of Millbrook was busier than usual. Townspeople gathering in small groups, voices lowered in conversation. As Maggie passed, several fell silent, casting sympathetic or curious glances her way. News traveled fast in small towns, and everyone would know by now that the Sullivan Ranch was gone. Hunger twisted in Maggie's stomach, a sharp reminder that she hadn't eaten since morning. Clara would have food waiting, but Maggie hesitated to return to the Chinese woman's home so soon. Clara had already done so much, asking nothing in return. Pride, one of the few possessions Maggie had left, made her reluctant to accept more charity without offering something in exchange. The general store would extend credit to most townspeople, but Maggie knew her name was likely on a list of those to avoid. The bank had made sure everyone knew the Sullivans were in debt. That left few options. The Blackwood Saloon dominated the center of town, its freshly painted exterior and large windows a stark contrast to the weathered buildings surrounding it. Music and laughter spilled from the open doors, along with the smell of food. Real food, not the thin soups and plain bread that had been Maggie's staple since Patrick's death. She stood across the street watching patrons come and go, her hunger warring with her hatred for the establishment's owner. The baby kicked again, more insistently, and Maggie made her decision. She would swallow her pride for the sake of her child. The noise dimmed momentarily as Maggie stepped through the batwing doors. Several heads turned, conversations paused, and then resumed with greater intensity. A pregnant widow in a saloon was unusual enough to merit gossip, but the widow of Patrick Sullivan entering Harrison Blackwood's establishment was practically scandalous. Maggie ignored the stares, focusing instead on making her way to the bar. The room swam slightly before her eyes, a combination of hunger, exhaustion, and the smoky atmosphere. She gripped the polished wood for support, waiting for the barkeeper to notice her. The man Hank, if she remembered correctly, glanced up from the glass he was polishing, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to wary recognition. "Mrs. Sullivan," he acknowledged, his voice carefully neutral. "What can I do for you?" Maggie squared her shoulders, summoning dignity despite her circumstances. "I need food. Whatever's cheapest. I can work for it, washing dishes, sweeping floors." Hank's eyes flicked to her pregnant belly, then away, discomfort evident in the set of his mouth. "Don't think the boss would approve that arrangement, ma'am. Cash-only policy here." Desperation made Maggie press on. "Please. I haven't eaten since morning. My baby—" She stopped, unwilling to beg further. Something like sympathy crossed Hank's face. He glanced around furtively, then slid a plate of crackers across the bar. "Best I can do without the boss's say-so." Maggie reached for the meager offering with trembling fingers, gratitude warring with humiliation. The crackers were stale, but they would be something in her empty stomach. "Well, well, look who's decided to grace us with her presence." The voice cut through the saloon's ambient noise like a knife, smooth as silk and cold as steel. Maggie turned to find Harrison Blackwood, approaching, his movements fluid and controlled. Up close, he was younger than she had expected, perhaps 35, with the kind of conventional good looks that opened doors and lowered defenses. His suit was expertly tailored, his boots handcrafted leather, his smile practiced and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mrs. Sullivan," he continued, stopping a precise distance away, close enough to intimidate, far enough to appear proper. "I'm surprised to see you here. I understood you'd be leaving town by now." The words were polite, the threat beneath them unmistakable. Maggie felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "My home was burned to the ground, Mr. Blackwood. I have nowhere to leave to." Blackwood's smile didn't waver. "A regrettable necessity. The structure was unsound, a hazard, really. We did you a favor." Around them, the saloon had grown quieter patrons, watching the exchange with poorly disguised interest. Maggie was acutely aware of being the center of attention of her shabby dress and unkempt hair, contrasting with Blackwood's polished appearance. "I didn't ask for that kind of favor," she replied, her fingers tightening around the plate of crackers. Blackwood's eyes dropped to the plate, then back to her face. His expression shifted to one of mock concern. "Hungry Mrs. Sullivan reduced to begging in my establishment?" He clicked his tongue in disapproval. "How the mighty have fallen! Your husband had such ambitions." The way he lingered on the word sent a chill through Maggie. There was history there, something personal that went beyond business. "Patrick was a good man," she said the words, emerging with quiet force. "He worked that land honestly." "Honest?" Blackwood's laugh was sudden and sharp. "Is that what you think?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping so that only she could hear. "Your husband was a fool who didn't know when to back down. Just like you, it seems." Before Maggie could respond, Blackwood raised his voice again, addressing the room at large. "Gentlemen, we have a charitable case on our hands. Mrs. Sullivan here needs food but can't pay." He reached into his pocket and extracted a coin, placing it on the bar with theatrical precision. "There, that should cover some bread and milk for the widow. Consider it my Christian duty." The humiliation burned hotter than any physical pain Maggie had ever experienced. She wanted to refuse to throw the coin back in his smug face, but the baby's needs outweighed her pride. "Thank you." She managed the words acid on her tongue. Blackwood's smile widened, knowing he'd scored a victory. "You're welcome, Mrs. Sullivan, though I'd advise against making a habit of visiting my establishment. It's not suitable for a woman in your condition." His gaze lingered on her belly. "Especially one who can't pay her way." Something snapped inside Maggie, a restraint that had been holding back her rage since Patrick's death. "My husband built this town when it was nothing but mud and failed dreams," she said, her voice low, but carrying. "He dug wells when children were dying of thirst. He helped families through harsh winters when no one else would extend credit." Blackwood's expression hardened, the charming facade slipping to reveal something colder beneath. "Your husband overextended himself, made promises he couldn't keep. That's not business, Mrs. Sullivan. That's foolishness." "It's humanity," Maggie countered. "Something you wouldn't recognize if it stood before you in broad daylight." A muscle twitched in Blackwood's jaw, the first crack in his composure. "Humanity doesn't pay debts, Mrs. Sullivan. Cash does. And your husband left you with precious little of that, didn't he?" The barb struck deep, but Maggie refused to show its impact. "He left me more than you know." Blackwood's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Did he now?" He seemed about to say more, then checked himself, glancing around at the attentive audience they'd attracted. With visible effort, he reassumed his mask of civility. "Enjoy your meal, Mrs. Sullivan. It may be the last charity you receive in Millbrook." He turned to leave, then paused, adding over his shoulder, "Your husband should have learned when to stop talking." Like father, like son, I suppose. The casual comment hit Maggie like a physical blow. Patrick had never mentioned knowing Blackwood before moving to Millbrook, and Blackwood had certainly never indicated any prior connection to the Sullivans. Yet his words suggested a history one Patrick had kept from her. Before she could process this revelation, Blackwood strode away, calling jovially to a group of poker players as if the confrontation had never occurred. The saloon's normal volume resumed, though Maggie felt the weight of curious stares still upon her. Hank slid a plate with bread and a glass of milk toward her, avoiding eye contact. Maggie took them with murmured thanks, finding a corner table where she could eat with what little dignity remained to her. The food, plain as it was, eased the worst of her hunger, but did nothing for the storm of questions Blackwood's parting comment had unleashed. Like father, like son. What had he meant? Patrick's father had died before Maggie met him, and her husband had spoken of him rarely and with obvious pain. Had there been some connection between Patrick's father and Blackwood? And if so, why had Patrick never mentioned it? Lost in thought, Maggie didn't notice the man approaching her table until he cleared his throat softly. She looked up to find a stranger regarding her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. He was perhaps 40, with the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. His clothes were well made but practical, and unlike most men in the saloon, he wore no visible sidearm. "Mrs. Sullivan," he inquired, his voice pitched low enough that nearby tables wouldn't overhear. "Samuel Grant. May I join you for a moment?" Wary but intrigued, Maggie nodded. Grant took the seat across from her, his movements deliberate and controlled. "I'm sorry to intrude," he began, "but I couldn't help overhearing your exchange with Blackwood." He glanced around, then leaned forward slightly. "I've been looking for someone who might be willing to speak candidly about him." Maggie studied the stranger, trying to place his accent. Eastern, perhaps Boston, or New York. "Why would you be interested in Harrison Blackwood?" Grant's expression remained neutral, but his eyes, keen and observant, never left her face. "I'm investigating a series of incidents across several territories. Blackwood's name has come up repeatedly." "You're the law?" Maggie asked, her voice dropping even lower. A slight smile touched Grant's lips. "In a manner of speaking, I work for the Treasury Department Special Investigations." Understanding dawned. "You're undercover." Grant inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Officially, I'm Samuel Grant, correspondent for the Western Chronicle, researching a piece on small-town development." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Unofficially, I'm tracking a man who's left a trail of financial ruin across 3 territories." Hope dangerous? Fragile hope fluttered in Maggie's chest. "And you think that man is Blackwood?" "I know it is," Grant replied with quiet certainty. "Though the name changes. In Denver he was James Harrington. In Cheyenne, William Mercer. Here, Harrison Blackwood. Same methods, same results, communities gutted from the inside out." Maggie's mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized existed. The foreclosures, the loans with impossible terms, the sudden ownership changes. Grant nodded. "His pattern is consistent. Arrive when a town is vulnerable after a failed mining boom, a harsh winter, a poor harvest. Establish himself as a businessman and benefactor. Offer loans when the bank won't. Then, when people can't pay, take everything they own." "But that's not illegal," Maggie pointed out, bitter reality tempering her hope. "Immoral, yes, but not against the law." "The fraud, embezzlement, and suspected murder are," Grant countered softly. "Your husband's death, for instance, the timing was remarkably convenient for Blackwood's acquisition plans." Maggie's breath caught. "You think Blackwood had Patrick killed?" Grant's expression remained carefully neutral. I think your husband's accident deserves closer scrutiny, as do several other convenient deaths that preceded major property transfers to Blackwood's enterprises. The implication sent ice through Maggie's veins. She had suspected foul play, but hearing it suggested by a federal agent made it terrifyingly real. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her hand protectively covering her belly as the baby shifted restlessly. "Because I need allies, Mrs. Sullivan. People who know the town, who understand what Blackwood's been doing. And frankly, people with nothing left to lose." Grant's gaze was steady, assessing. "You fit that description better than most." Maggie considered his words, weighing the risks against the tantalizing possibility of justice. "What exactly would helping you entail? Information initially. Your perspective on Blackwood's operations here. Any documents your husband might have left that could shed light on his business practices." Grant leaned forward slightly. "I noticed Blackwood's reaction when you mentioned your husband left you more than you know. Was that just defiance, or did Patrick Sullivan actually leave you something that could threaten Blackwood?" The hidden note in Patrick's watch seemed to burn against Maggie's skin where it lay in her pocket. B&B 1869. Could it be evidence of Blackwood's or Harrington's crimes? "Perhaps," she answered cautiously. "But I'm not certain what it means yet." Grant nodded, accepting her reticence. "Fair enough. Trust is earned, not given." He produced a small notebook from his coat pocket, scribbled something, then tore out the page and slid it across the table. "I'm staying at the Williams boarding house on the edge of town. If you decide you want to talk further, you can find me there." He rose, adjusting his coat with the unconscious precision of a man accustomed to presenting a specific image to the world. "One last thing, Mrs. Sullivan. Blackwood is dangerous, more so than the town realizes. Be careful what you say and to whom." With that, he touched the brim of his hat in farewell and made his way to the bar, seamlessly transitioning into the role of a journalist interviewing locals for a story. Maggie watched him go, the piece of paper with his information clutched in her hand, her mind a whirlwind of new possibilities. The federal government was investigating Blackwood. Patrick's death might not go unpunished, after all. And the cryptic note hidden in the watch might be more valuable than she had realized. As Maggie left the saloon, the weight of stares heavy on her back, a new emotion mingled with her grief and anger, hope, small but persistent, like the first green shoot after a long winter. Clara was waiting when Maggie returned, her expression a mixture of concern and relief. "You went to the saloon," she stated, rather than asked, her keen eyes noting the lingering scent of tobacco smoke that clung to Maggie's clothes. "I needed food," Maggie replied simply, sinking into a chair by the fire. The walk back, combined with the emotional toll of her confrontation with Blackwood, had drained what little energy she'd had. Clara made a disapproving sound but busied herself preparing tea rather than pressing the issue. "Did you see it? Your home?" Maggie nodded, the image of charred timbers rising unbidden in her mind. "They burned it to the ground." "Blackwood fears what he cannot control," Clara said, her voice matter-of-fact. "He destroys rather than allows others to possess." "He knew Patrick's father," Maggie said, the revelation still unsettling her. "He mentioned it today, threw it in my face, like it was something I should understand." Clara's hands stilled momentarily in their work. Many connections in this town go deeper than they appear. Millbrook has secrets buried in its foundations. Before Maggie could ask what she meant, Clara continued, "You met someone at the saloon, someone new." It wasn't a question, and Maggie didn't bother asking how Clara knew. The Chinese woman seemed to have an uncanny awareness of everything that happened in Millbrook, despite her somewhat isolated position in the community. "A man named Grant. He says he's a federal agent investigating Blackwood. Clara's eyebrows rose slightly. Government men rarely bring good fortune. This one might, Maggie replied, explaining Grant's revelations about Blackwoods or Harrington's history in other towns. Clara listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. When Maggie finished, the older woman was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the fire. "My husband saw such men on the railroad," she finally said. "Men who change names like snakes, shed skin. Always moving, always taking." She looked up, her dark eyes intense. "Be careful with this Grant. He may hunt the snake, but that doesn't make him your friend." Maggie nodded, accepting the wisdom in Clara's caution. "I haven't decided whether to trust him yet. But if he's telling the truth, if Blackwood really is a wanted criminal, it could be the key to stopping him." "There are many keys," Clara said cryptically. "The trick is knowing which door to unlock first." She handed Maggie a cup of fragrant tea. "Drink, rest. Tomorrow we think more clearly." Maggie accepted the cup, letting the warmth seep into her hands. "Clara, what did you mean about Millbrook having secrets in its foundations?" The older woman's face grew still, as if she was weighing how much to reveal. "This land has known blood before yours or mine," she said finally. "Gold rush brought greed. Greed brought violence. Some wounds never truly heal. They just get buried under new buildings, new names, new lies." There was personal pain in her voice that made Maggie wonder what Clara herself had lost to Millbrook's buried history. "Is that why you stayed after your husband died?" A ghost of a smile crossed Clara's face. "I stay because there is work to do. Healing needed. Not just bodies, spirits too." She nodded toward Maggie's belly. "New life brings new chance. Your child might see better Millbrook than we have known." The simple faith in her words touched Maggie deeply. Clara had every reason to be bitter a widow in a foreign land often treated with suspicion or outright hostility due to her ethnicity, yet she maintained a steadfast belief in the possibility of a better future. "I hope you're right," Maggie said softly. "Hope is good," Clara replied. "Action is better." She rose, moving to a small cabinet in the corner of the room. From it she withdrew a worn leather journal. "Your husband came to me 2 weeks before he died. Asked for old maps, old stories about the land." Surprise jolted through Maggie. "Patrick came here. He never mentioned it." "Some secrets are meant to protect," Clara said simply, offering the journal. "He left this, said to keep safe, give to you if anything happened to him." With trembling hands, Maggie accepted the journal. The leather was soft with age, and used the pages filled with Patrick's familiar handwriting. Dates, notes, calculations, most related to the ranch's operations, but interspersed with observations about the land itself, water sources, soil conditions, rock formations. "Why would he leave this with you?" Maggie wondered aloud. "He trusted me," Clara replied. "Few do. It is an honor I do not take lightly." She paused, then added, "He was afraid, I think. Not for himself, for you, for the baby. He said knowledge was protection, but only if the right people had it." Maggie flipped through the pages, searching for anything that might explain the cryptic note in the watch. Near the back of the journal, she found a hastily sketched map of the Sullivan property, with specific areas marked and annotated. One notation caught her eye: B&B marker original survey line differs from recorded deed. B&B. She breathed, the connection snapping into place. Boundary and benchmark, 1869. It's a survey reference. Clara watched her with quiet intensity. "You found something else. Something he hid." Maggie hesitated only briefly before withdrawing the note from her pocket. "In his watch. I only discovered it last night. Clara examined the note without touching it, her expression revealing nothing. Land belongs to those who work it. B&B 1869, she read aloud. Your husband believed in justice more than law. Sometimes they are not the same thing. But what does it mean? How can a survey marker from 1869 help me against Blackwood now? Clara returned to her chair, folding her hands in her lap with deliberate calm. Before railroad, before mining claims, government sent men to draw lines on paper. These lines became law. Who owns what, where property begins and ends? Her eyes took on a faraway look. My husband helped survey crews, carried equipment, dug marker posts. He said, American law, strange paper, more important than people. Understanding began to dawn. Patrick found something in the original survey, something that conflicts with the current property lines. Clara nodded. Boundaries move, papers change, but original markers remain in ground, silent witnesses to first truth. Excitement kindled in Maggie's chest. If Patrick had discovered a discrepancy between the original 1869 survey and current property records, it could challenge the legal basis of Blackwood's claim to their land. But proving such a discrepancy would require access to the original survey documents. Documents that would be kept in the county records office, not in Millbrook. I need to see the original survey, Maggie said, thinking aloud. Compare it to our deed. Difficult, Clara observed. Records kept in Helena. Many days' travel. Maggie's heart sank at the reminder of the practical obstacles. In her condition, traveling to Helena was out of the question. And even if she could make the journey, accessing official records would require money and influence, both of which she lacked. There must be another year, she insisted, refusing to surrender the first real hope she'd found. Patrick wouldn't have left this clue if there wasn't a way to use it. Clara seemed about to respond when a sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Both women tensed, Maggie hastily tucking the note and journal out of sight. Clara moved to the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. Sheriff, she reported, her tone neutral. Maggie's pulse quickened. Sheriff Reynolds was nominally the law in Millbrook, but everyone knew he was firmly in Blackwood's pocket. His arrival so soon after her confrontation at the saloon couldn't be coincidence. Should I hide? She whispered. Clara shook her head. No point. He knows you're here. She straightened her shoulders. Let me talk. Say little. The knocking came again, more insistent. Clara opened the door just wide enough to reveal Sheriff Reynolds standing on the porch, his weathered face set in lines of official disapproval. Evening, Mrs. Wu, he said, touching the brim of his hat in cursory politeness. I need a word with Mrs. Sullivan, if she's available. It's late, Clara replied, not moving from the doorway. She is resting. Come tomorrow. Reynolds sighed, a man performing an unpleasant duty. This won't wait, ma'am. There's been a complaint. What kind of complaint? Maggie asked, moving to stand beside Clara. Reynolds's gaze shifted to her, something like regret flickering briefly in his eyes. Disturbance at the Blackwood Saloon earlier today. Mr. Blackwood claims you made threats against his property and person. Indignation flared in Maggie's chest. That's absurd. He humiliated me in front of the entire saloon. If anyone made threats, it was him. Be that as it may, Reynolds continued his tone, suggesting he was reciting a prepared speech. I'm obligated to issue a formal warning. Any further disturbances will result in your arrest for disorderly conduct. The injustice of it struck Maggie like a physical blow. My home was burned to the ground today, Sheriff. My husband died under suspicious circumstances, and you're warning me about disturbing the peace. Reynolds had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm just doing my job, Mrs. Sullivan. Your job is to uphold the law, Maggie retorted, not enforce Blackwood's personal vendettas. A muscle twitched in Reynolds's jaw. Mrs. Sullivan, I understand you're going through a difficult time, but do you, Maggie interrupted, anger overriding caution, do you understand what it's like to lose everything, to watch someone destroy your life and be powerless to stop them? Maggie, Clara warned softly, placing a restraining hand on her arm. Reynolds's expression hardened. I came here as a courtesy, Mrs. Sullivan. Next time, it'll be official business. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about your home. That wasn't right no matter what the legal papers say. The unexpected sympathy caught Maggie off guard. Before she could respond, Reynolds was striding back toward town, his shoulders set in a rigid line. Clara closed the door, her movements deliberate. Sheriff has conscience. Interesting. A conscience that doesn't stop him from doing Blackwood's bidding, Maggie observed bitterly. Every man has breaking point, Clara replied. Question is what bends him first, fear or courage? She guided Maggie back to her chair. Rest now. Tomorrow we find someone who knows old papers. As Clara busied herself preparing for the night, Maggie sat lost in thought, turning Patrick's journal over in her hands. The confrontation with Blackwood Grant's revelations, the cryptic note about the survey marker, the sheriff's warning, all of it swirled in her mind like leaves caught in a whirlwind. One thing was becoming increasingly clear: whatever Patrick had discovered before his death was significant enough to kill for. The question now was whether it was also significant enough to build justice upon. Outside, darkness settled over Millbrook like a shroud concealing its secrets for another night. But Maggie Sullivan, cradling both her unborn child and newfound determination, made a silent vow to bring those secrets into the light, no matter the cost. Dawn broke with the clarity that often follows storms, both literal and emotional. Maggie woke feeling more purposeful than she had since Patrick's death. The path forward remained uncertain, but at least now she had direction, a puzzle to solve, a truth to uncover. Clara was already awake, tending to her small herb garden in the cool morning air. Maggie joined her, grateful for the simple activity that allowed her mind to work on the questions that had haunted her dreams. I need to find someone who understands land surveys, she said carefully, pulling weeds from around a cluster of medicinal plants. Someone who can explain what Patrick might have discovered. Clara nodded, her experienced hands moving efficiently among the plants. Edith Parker, school teacher before you were born, knows history of this land better than anyone. Is she still in Millbrook? Maggie asked, hope rising. I don't recall meeting her. Lives at edge of town. Keeps to herself now. Clara straightened, wiping soil from her hands. Mind sharp as ever, though. If anyone knows old maps, old boundaries, it's Edith. The prospect of speaking with someone who might help decode Patrick's clue energized Maggie. Will you introduce me? Clara's expression grew thoughtful. Better I go first. Explain. Edith doesn't trust easily, especially not Sullivan name. This caught Maggie by surprise. Why would she have reason to distrust Sullivan's history? Clara said simply. Not my story to tell, but Edith will if she chooses. She gathered a small bundle of herbs, securing them with twine. Stay here. Rest. I will speak with Edith, return by midday. Though part of Maggie chafed at being left behind, she recognized the wisdom in Clara's approach. If Edith Parker harbored some historical grudge against the Sullivan family, Clara's introduction might make the difference between obtaining help and being turned away. Thank you, Maggie said, meaning it deeply. Clara acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod. Study journal while I'm gone. Your husband left more than words on those pages. Look between lines. After Clara departed, Maggie settled at the small table near the window, Patrick's journal open before her. She had read it through once already, but now she approached it with new purpose, searching for patterns, hidden meanings, anything that might connect to the survey reference. The earliest entries dated back to when they first acquired the ranch, detailing Patrick's plans for improvement, his hopes for expanding their herd, his joy at creating a legacy for their future children. Reading his words so full of life and purpose sent a fresh wave of grief through Maggie. She allowed herself to feel it, fully acknowledging the loss, without letting it overwhelm her determination. As she progressed through the journal, she noticed subtle changes in Patrick's focus. About 6 months ago, his entries began to include more observations about the land itself, not just in terms of ranching potential, but geological features, water sources, and oddly specific notes about certain rock formations on the property. One entry from 4 months ago caught her attention. Found unusual rock formations in North Pasture today. Quartz veins, unlike anything else on the property. Reminded me of formations near the Silver Bow Strike of '66. Worth investigating further. The next several entries tracked Patrick's growing interest in these formations, including sketches and notes about similar features he'd observed elsewhere in the territory. Then 3 months ago, a terse entry confirmed my suspicions today. Sample tests positive. Must proceed carefully. B. Not to be trusted. B. Blackwood. It had to be. But what had Patrick confirmed? What sample had tested positive? And why did he suddenly distrust Blackwood? The entries following that revelation became increasingly cryptic, with references to the old markers and original boundaries appearing more frequently. Patrick had clearly been building toward some significant discovery, one that had made him cautious enough to encode his findings. The final entry, dated just 2 days before his death, read simply, "Records don't match reality. B knows. Meeting tomorrow to confront. If anything happens, the truth is in the watch, and with C must be Clara." And the truth in the watch was the note about the 1869 survey. Patrick had known he was in danger, had even anticipated the possibility of his own death, yet had gone to meet Blackwood anyway. Tears blurred Maggie's vision. Her husband had died trying to right some wrong, to expose some truth that Blackwood wanted buried. She owed it to him, to their child, to finish what he had started. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Hastily wiping her eyes, Maggie approached cautiously, remembering the sheriff's warning from the previous night. "Who is it?" she called without opening the door. "Samuel Grant," came the reply. "We spoke yesterday at the saloon." Maggie hesitated, Clara's warning about government men echoing in her mind. But Grant might have information she needed, insights into Blackwood's operations that could help her understand what Patrick had discovered. She opened the door to find Grant standing on the porch, hat in hand. His expression serious but not alarming. "Mrs. Sullivan," he greeted her. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I saw Mrs. Wu heading out of town and thought it might be a good opportunity to continue our conversation. May I come in?" Maggie stepped aside, allowing him entry, but leaving the door open both for propriety's sake and to maintain an easy exit if needed. "How did you know I was staying with Mrs. Wu?" Grant smiled slightly. "Small towns have few secrets, Mrs. Sullivan, especially for someone trained to look for them." He remained standing, seemingly conscious of the impropriety of sitting alone with a woman in her home, however temporary that home might be. "I heard about what happened at the saloon yesterday. Blackwood moved quickly to try to intimidate you." "The sheriff delivered his message last night," Maggie confirmed, watching Grant's reaction carefully. A flicker of concern crossed his face. Reynolds is an interesting case. Not entirely corrupted, but compromised enough to be useful to Blackwood. He paused, studying her with that same assessing gaze from the saloon. You've been busy since our talk. Found something in your husband's papers, perhaps? The directness of the question put Maggie on alert. What makes you think that, because Blackwood sent one of his men to watch this house after the sheriff left last night? Grant replied matter-of-factly. He's worried about something you might know or have. Alarm shot through Maggie. We're being watched. Were, Grant corrected. I took the liberty of discouraging the gentleman in question, but Blackwood will send others. His expression grew more serious. Which is why I'm here, Mrs. Sullivan. Whatever you've found, whatever you suspect, you need protection to pursue it. I can provide that. The offer was tempting, but Maggie remained cautious. And in return, information that helps me build my case against Blackwood. Evidence of his criminal activities across territorial lines. Grant's directness was refreshing after Blackwood's smooth manipulations. I've been tracking him for over a year. I know his patterns, his associates, his methods. What I need is documentation paper trails that connect Harrison Blackwood to his previous identities and crimes. Maggie considered her options. Grant was right about one thing: she couldn't pursue Patrick's clues alone, not with Blackwood already suspicious and watching. And if Grant truly was a federal agent, his resources and authority would be invaluable. My husband left a note, she said, finally deciding to test Grant's reactions without revealing everything. It references a boundary survey from 1869. He seemed to think it was important enough to hide. Grant's eyebrows rose slightly. Land boundaries, that's not what I expected. What did you expect? Banking records, proof of fraud, perhaps evidence of violence. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. But property lines, that's interesting, especially given Blackwood's pattern of land acquisition. Maggie felt a small thrill of validation. Grant wasn't dismissing Patrick's clue, he was trying to fit it into what he already knew about Blackwood. My husband mentioned finding unusual rock formations on our property. She continued, watching Grant carefully. He was increasingly interested in them in the months before his death. Understanding dawned in Grant's eyes. Silver, he said quietly. Or gold. The Sullivan Ranch sits on a deposit. The possibility had occurred to Maggie while reading the journal, but hearing Grant articulate it made it suddenly blindingly obvious. That's why Blackwood wanted our land so badly, not for grazing or timber, but for what's beneath the surface. It fits his pattern, Grant confirmed. In Colorado, he acquired properties along the Front Range just before a major silver strike was announced. In Wyoming, it was coal deposits. He has an uncanny ability to anticipate resource discoveries or inside information about them. A horrible thought struck Maggie. What if it wasn't just anticipation? What if Patrick discovered the deposit and Blackwood found out? Grant's expression grew grim. Then your husband's death becomes not just convenient, but necessary from Blackwood's perspective. A man willing to eliminate obstacles to acquire land wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a person. The cold certainty in his voice confirmed Maggie's worst fears. Patrick hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered for what he knew, for what he'd discovered about their land. I need to see the original survey, she said, the urgency of her quest growing. Patrick believed there was some discrepancy between the 1869 boundaries and current records, something that might invalidate Blackwood's claim. The Territorial Land Office would have those records, Grant mused, but accessing them without raising suspicion would be difficult. Blackwood likely has contacts there who would alert him to any inquiries. Mrs. Wu has gone to speak with Edith Parker, a former school teacher who apparently knows the history of land claims around Millbrook. She might have information that could help. Grant nodded approvingly. A wise approach. Local knowledge often reveals shortcuts that official channels miss. He glanced toward the open door, his expression shifting to one of professional assessment. I should go. My presence here will already be noted, and I don't want to draw more attention to you than necessary. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small revolver, offering it to Maggie. Take this. It's small enough to conceal but effective at close range. Maggie stared at the weapon, torn between the security it offered and the danger it represented. I've never fired a gun, she admitted. It's simple enough. Point and squeeze the trigger, but the mere presence of it may deter trouble. When she still hesitated, Grant added gently, Mrs. Sullivan, you're investigating a man who's already taken everything from you, including potentially your husband's life. Don't underestimate what he might do to protect his interests. But that way the decision was clear. Maggie accepted the revolver, its weight both reassuring and terrifying in her hand. I'll return this evening to speak with both you and Mrs. Wu, Grant said, moving toward the door. Perhaps by then we'll have more pieces of this puzzle assembled. After he left, Maggie sat with the revolver in her lap, its presence a tangible reminder of the danger she faced. Grant was right. Blackwood had already demonstrated his willingness to destroy her home and livelihood. If he believed she possessed information that could threaten his operations, he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate her as well. The baby kicked a sharp reminder of everything at stake. Maggie placed the revolver on the table and returned to Patrick's journal, determined to extract every clue, every hint that might lead to the truth her husband had died protecting. Outside, Millbrook went about its morning business, unaware that beneath its dusty streets and weathered buildings currents of long-buried secrets were stirring, threatening to break the surface and change everything. I've written the first part of your story, Land of Justice, based on the detailed outline you provided. This section introduces Maggie Sullivan, a pregnant widow, who discovers her husband Patrick left hidden clues about the true nature of their land before his suspicious death. After Harrison Blackwood burns down her home and humiliates her at his saloon, Maggie begins unraveling the mystery with help from Clara Wu, a Chinese healer, and Samuel Grant, an undercover Treasury agent. The narrative follows your outline, closely incorporating a strong hook with Blackwood destroying the Sullivan Ranch. Development of psychological depth for each character. The mystery of B&B 1869 and Patrick's hidden message. Clara's subplot about her husband's railroad work. The tension between immediate survival and pursuit of justice. This first 7,000-word section establishes the cinematic emotional tone you requested while setting up the central conflicts. Would you like me to continue with Part 2, or would you prefer to provide feedback on this section? First, Clara returned shortly after midday, her expression thoughtful as she hung her shawl by the door. Maggie, who had spent the intervening hours poring over Patrick's journal, looked up expectantly. "Did you speak with Edith Parker?" she asked, setting aside the journal. Clara nodded, moving to the stove where a pot of soup simmered. "She will see you, but—" She paused, stirring the soup with deliberate care. "She has conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "You must go alone, and you must bring your husband's journal." Clara ladled soup into 2 bowls, placing one before Maggie. "She is particular. Age gives her this right." Maggie accepted the bowl with murmured thanks, though her appetite had been eclipsed by curiosity. "Did she say why she distrusts the Sullivan name?" "Not for me to tell," Clara replied, taking her seat across the small table. "Some stories belong to those who lived them." She blew gently on her soup. "I told her about the note in the watch. This is what convinced her to see you." "Did she recognize the reference B&B 1869? "She did not say, but her eyes, Clara made a small gesture. Recognition, yes, and something else. Fear, perhaps. Maggie considered this as she ate. Why would an old boundary survey inspire fear in a former schoolteacher? What connection could Edith Parker have to land disputes from nearly 20 years ago? There's something else you should know, Maggie said, deciding to trust Clara with Grant's visit. A man came while you were gone, the agent I met at the saloon. He believes Blackwood is after our land, because there might be silver deposits beneath it. Clara's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Silver, she repeated the word heavy with significance. My husband spoke of this possibility many years ago. The old miners believed precious metal continued north from Silver Bow, but no one found enough to justify claims. Patrick was noting unusual rock formations in his journal. Maggie explained, quartz veins similar to those found near silver deposits. He wrote that he'd confirmed his suspicions with a sample test. Clara set down her spoon, her expression grave. If true, this explains much. Men kill for less than silver. She studied Maggie's face. This agent, you trust him? Maggie hesitated. Not entirely, but his theory makes sense of Patrick's notes and Blackwood's determination to acquire our land. She didn't mention the revolver Grant had left still hidden in the folds of her skirt. Be cautious, Clara advised. Many players in this game now. Not all show true face. She resumed eating, then added, You should see Edith this afternoon. She does not sleep well at night. Best to visit before sunset. After the meal, Clara gave Maggie directions to Edith Parker's home, a small cottage at the opposite end of town, from her own nestled against the foothills that marked Millbrook's eastern boundary. The walk would take nearly 30 minutes longer given Maggie's condition, but Clara insisted it was safe enough in daylight. Stay on main paths, she cautioned as Maggie prepared to leave. Blackwood's men watch Saloon Bank land office, not old woman's home. Maggie secured Patrick's journal inside her shawl, along with the note from the watch, and after a moment's hesitation, Grant's revolver. The weight of the weapon against her side was a constant reminder of the stakes involved. The day had warmed considerably, the autumn sun casting long shadows across Millbrook's dusty streets. As Maggie made her way through town, she noted the signs of slow decay that had taken hold since the mining boom faded. Peeling paint, sagging porches, empty storefronts with faded "For Lease" signs. Only Blackwood's establishments showed signs of prosperity. The saloon with its fresh paint and polished windows, the mercantile he'd acquired last year, the small hotel that catered to the few travelers who still passed through. People nodded politely as she passed, but their eyes slid away quickly, whether from discomfort at her obvious pregnancy or fear of association with someone Blackwood had marked. Maggie couldn't tell. The isolation stung, though she'd grown somewhat accustomed to it in the months since Patrick's death. Edith Parker's cottage appeared as Clara had described, small but well-maintained, with a neat garden of hardy perennials and a stone path leading to the front door. Unlike most homes in Millbrook, which faced the street directly, this cottage was set back partially screened by mature pine trees that provided both privacy and protection from the harsh Montana winters. Maggie hesitated at the gate, suddenly nervous. What if Edith refused to help? What if Clara was wrong about the old teacher's knowledge? She pushed the doubts aside and opened the gate, her decision made. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal a woman who seemed to embody the essence of weathered dignity. Edith Parker stood perhaps 5 feet tall, her frame slight but unbowed by her years, which Maggie estimated to be at least 70. Her hair pulled back in a severe silver bun, contrasted with eyes so dark and sharp they seemed to belong to a much younger woman. She wore a simple dark dress with a high collar, its severity softened only by a cameo brooch at her throat. "Margaret Sullivan," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "You look like your mother-in-law. Same determined chin." She stepped aside. "Come in. We have much to discuss, and limited time for pleasantries." Surprised by the reference to Patrick's mother, whom she'd never met, Maggie entered the cottage. The interior was as neat as the garden, with simple furnishings arranged for comfort rather than show. Books lined every available wall space, and a desk near the window held papers organized in precise stacks. "You knew Patrick's mother?" Maggie asked, accepting the chair Edith indicated near the hearth. "I knew the entire Sullivan family," Edith replied, settling into a rocking chair opposite Maggie. "Taught Patrick when he was a boy before his family moved east. Taught his father, too, when I was just starting out." A shadow crossed her face. "Different times, different Millbrook." She studied Maggie with that penetrating gaze. "Clara Wu says you found something in your husband's effects, a reference to old boundaries." Maggie withdrew the note from her shawl. "In his pocket watch. Land belongs to those who work it, B&B 1869. And in his journal references to a boundary marker and survey lines that don't match recorded deeds." Edith accepted the note with careful hands, her expression unreadable as she examined it. "Patrick always was too clever for his own good," she murmured. "Just like his father." "Mrs. Parker," Maggie said, unable to contain her questions any longer. "What does this mean?" Clara said. "You might know about the old surveys, the original boundaries." Edith set the note aside and fixed Maggie with a measuring look. "What do you know about how Millbrook was founded, Mrs. Sullivan?" The question caught Maggie off guard. "Only the basics. It began as a mining settlement during the gold rush of '67, though the claims never produced as expected." "That's the simplified version," Edith agreed. "The story people tell tourists and school children. The truth, as always, is more complicated." She leaned forward slightly. "Millbrook exists because of a lie that has shaped every aspect of this town's development for nearly 20 years. "What kind of lie?" "The kind that makes men rich and powerful at others' expense." Edith's gaze drifted to the window where the fading afternoon light cast long shadows across her garden. "In 1867, a prospector named William Miller discovered gold in the creek that now bears his name. Not a massive strike, but enough to trigger the usual rush. Men poured in, staking claims, building shacks, dreaming of fortunes." She paused, her fingers tracing the pattern on her cameo. "Among them was a man calling himself Harrison Black, your Mr. Blackwood's father." Shock rippled through Maggie. Blackwood's father founded Millbrook. "In a manner of speaking," Edith replied. "Harrison Black was cleverer than most. Instead of wasting time panning for gold, he established the town's first general store, then its first saloon. When miners needed supplies or entertainment, Black was there to provide it, at prices that ensured they remained in perpetual debt to him." The pattern sounded disturbingly familiar to Maggie. Like father, like son. "Precisely," Edith nodded. "By 1869, when the territorial government sent surveyors to officially map the region, Black had positioned himself as Millbrook's leading citizen. He accompanied the survey team, personally acting as guide and host." Her expression darkened. "And ensuring the resulting maps reflected his interests rather than reality." Understanding began to dawn. "He altered the survey boundaries. With the aid of a corrupt surveyor, yes. The official maps filed with the Territorial Land Office showed Miller Creek following a path that gave Black control of the most promising mining areas. But the actual creek, and thus the actual boundary line, according to territorial law, ran nearly a mile east." Maggie's mind raced, connecting pieces of the puzzle. "And the B&B marker, boundary and benchmark," Edith confirmed. The original survey team placed physical markers throughout the territory's stone cairns with metal plates marked B&B and the year. Most were later removed or covered as development progressed, but a few remained silent witnesses to the original accurate survey. "And Patrick found one of these markers on our property," Maggie said, excitement building. "One that contradicts the official records." Edith nodded slowly. "If he did, it would explain many things, including his death." She rose with the careful movements of age and crossed to her desk, retrieving a rolled document from a drawer. "This came into my possession years ago after the death of the survey team's junior member, a young man with more conscience than career ambition." She unrolled the document on a small table, revealing a hand-drawn map of the Millbrook region. Unlike the precise lines of official maps, this one showed annotations, corrections, and areas marked with question marks. "The actual survey before Black's manipulations," Edith explained. "Notice the creek's path and the property lines that follow it." Maggie leaned forward, studying the faded lines. Miller Creek did indeed follow a different course than she recalled from official maps, cutting through what was now the Sullivan Ranch and continuing northward through land currently claimed by the railroad and several mining companies, all controlled directly or indirectly by Blackwood. "If this map is accurate," Maggie said slowly, "then a significant portion of what Blackwood claims as his property is actually rightfully owned by others." "Yes," Edith finished, "including potentially your ranch." She carefully re-rolled the map. "But proving this after nearly 20 years would be virtually impossible without physical evidence like an original boundary marker." Hope surged in Maggie's chest. "And that's what Patrick found. That's what the note means. There's a B&B marker on our property that proves the original boundary line." "If it still exists," Edith cautioned, "and if you can locate it. The Sullivan Ranch covers considerable acreage." Maggie opened Patrick's journal, turning to the pages with his rough property sketches. "He marked areas of interest here. This must be where he found the marker." She pointed to a notation in the northern pasture near where Patrick had also noted unusual rock formations. Edith studied the sketch, then nodded slowly. "Possible? That area would align with where the original survey team would have placed markers along Miller Creek's true path." She looked up, her expression grave. "But understand what you're contemplating, Mrs. Sullivan. If you pursue this, if you challenge the foundation of Blackwood's empire using this evidence, you're not just fighting one man. You're threatening the legal basis of land ownership throughout the region." The magnitude of what Patrick had discovered settled heavily on Maggie's shoulders. No wonder he had been cautious in coding his findings and hiding them in multiple locations. No wonder Blackwood had been willing to go to such lengths to acquire their land. "There's more," Maggie said, deciding to trust Edith with the full picture. "Patrick noted unusual rock formations in the same area, quartz veins similar to those found near silver deposits. A federal agent investigating Blackwood believes our land may contain valuable mineral resources." Edith's eyebrows rose. "Silver," she murmured. "That would explain Blackwood's determination." She was silent for a moment, then asked, "This federal agent, who is he?" "Samuel Grant. He claims to work for the Treasury Department, tracking Blackwood's activities across several territories." "And do you trust him?" The same question Clara had asked. Maggie considered her answer carefully. "I trust that he wants to bring Blackwood to justice. Whether his motives align completely with mine remains to be seen." Edith nodded, apparently satisfied with the honesty of the response. "Trust is a luxury in times like these. Verify what you can suspect, what you must." She rose again, moving to a cabinet from which she withdrew a leather-bound book. "This is a copy of the Territorial Mining Laws from 1865. pay particular attention to sections regarding mineral rights and property boundaries defined by natural features. Maggie accepted the book, recognizing its value to her cause. "Why are you helping me?" she asked the question that had been nagging at her since entering the cottage. "Clara said you distrusted the Sullivan name." Edith's expression softened slightly. "I distrusted one Sullivan Patrick's grandfather, who allied himself with Harrison Black during the early days of Millbrook. But his son Patrick's father tried to make amends. He discovered the boundary manipulation in '72 and attempted to expose it." Her voice dropped. "He died in a hunting accident shortly thereafter." The parallel to Patrick's fate sent a chill through Maggie. History repeating itself. "The sins of the fathers," Edith agreed somberly, "but also their courage. Patrick's father left detailed records of what he'd discovered, records that mysteriously disappeared after his death. I always suspected Black destroyed them." She studied Maggie's face. "Now his son has rediscovered the same truth and paid the same price." "Not entirely the same," Maggie said, her hand moving to her belly. "Patrick left behind more than just records." Edith's gaze softened further. "Yes, a child who will never know their father." She sighed, a sound heavy with old grief. "I lost my fiancé to Black's machinations all those years ago. He was the junior surveyor who provided this map, killed in a rock slide before he could testify about the altered boundaries." The personal connection explained Edith's willingness to help her detailed knowledge of events from decades past. This wasn't just historical interest, it was justice, long delayed. "What should I do now?" Maggie asked, the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on her shoulders. "The marker is likely still on the property, but Blackwood's men have taken control. And even if I could find it, proving its significance after all these years, evidence alone isn't enough," Edith agreed. "You need legal standing to challenge Blackwood's claims." She thought for a moment. "Harold Jenkins at the land office, he's not entirely in Blackwood's pocket. His father lost everything to Black Sr. back in '73. He might be willing to help authenticate documents if approached carefully. And the federal agent Grant might provide additional leverage," Maggie added, thinking aloud. "Especially if Blackwood's criminal activities cross territorial lines." Edith nodded. "A multi-pronged approach. Wise." She glanced out the window where the light was beginning to fade. "You should return to Clara's before dark. Take the book and study it tonight. Return tomorrow if you have questions." As Maggie gathered her belongings, Edith added, "One last thing, Mrs. Sullivan. Be very careful who you trust with what you've learned today. Millbrook has survived on half-truths and convenient lies for generations. Many people, not just Blackwood, have built lives on the foundation of that original deception." "Understand," Maggie assured her, securing the mining law book alongside Patrick's journal. Edith walked her to the door, then paused, her hand on the latch. "Your husband was a good man," she said quietly, "like his father before him. They both understood that some truths are worth dying for." Her dark eyes fixed on Maggie's. "The question you must ask yourself is whether this particular truth is worth living for." The words followed Maggie as she made her way back through town, the lengthening shadows matching her deepening thoughts. Edith was right, uncovering the truth about the boundary manipulation and potential silver deposits wouldn't bring Patrick back. But it might bring justice, not just for him, but for all those who had suffered under the Blackwood dynasty's corrupt influence. The main street was quieter now, shops closing for the evening, though light and noise spilled from the Blackwood Saloon as she passed. Maggie kept her head down, the books and journal concealed beneath her shawl, acutely aware of the revolver's weight against her side. She was so focused on avoiding attention that she nearly collided with Sheriff Reynolds as he emerged from the mercantile. Mrs. Sullivan, he said, steadying her with a hand on her arm, you shouldn't be out alone this close to dark. Maggie stepped back, uncomfortably aware of the incriminating materials she carried. I'm on my way back to Mrs. Wu's now, Sheriff. Reynolds glanced around, then lowered his voice. Listen, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but Blackwood's been asking questions about you, specifically about any documents your husband might have left behind. He's offering a reward for information. Surprise at this unexpected warning made Maggie careless. Why are you telling me this? A complex emotion crossed Reynolds's weathered face, something between shame and resolve. Let's just say I've been having some second thoughts about the company I keep. He straightened, resuming his official demeanor. Get on home now, Mrs. Sullivan. These streets aren't as safe as they once were. With a tip of his hat, he continued on his way, leaving Maggie to puzzle over this unexpected development. Was Reynolds having an attack of conscience? Or was this some elaborate ploy to gain her trust for Blackwood's benefit? She continued toward Clara's house, her steps quickening as twilight deepened. The information she now possessed felt dangerous, a burning coal she carried wrapped in flimsy paper. Edith's revelations had transformed Patrick's cryptic clue into a potential weapon against Blackwood, but wielding it would require careful planning and powerful allies. Clara was waiting on the porch when Maggie arrived, her usual calm demeanor tinged with anxiety. You were gone long, she observed, ushering Maggie inside. I worried. Edith had much to share, Maggie explained, setting down her precious burden of books and papers on the table. The boundary reference, it's evidence of fraud that goes back to Millbrook's founding, and it's connected to potential silver deposits on our land. Clara listened intently as Maggie recounted Edith's revelations about the altered survey boundaries, Harrison Black's manipulations, and the parallel between Patrick's fate and his father's. History circles like hawk, Clara observed when Maggie finished. Same patterns, new generation. She poured tea for them both, the familiar ritual grounding after the day's unsettling discoveries. What will you do now? I need to find the boundary marker Patrick discovered, Maggie said, sipping the fragrant tea gratefully. It's physical proof of the original survey line, but the ranch is... She trailed off, the reality of her situation reasserting itself. Blackwood controls the property now. His men would stop me before I got anywhere near the northern pasture. Not all his men loyal, Clara noted. Sheriff warned you today. Others might help too if approached correctly. Maggie recalled Reynolds's unexpected caution. I'm not sure I trust his warning. It could be a trap. Trust, no. Use, perhaps. Clara's expression grew thoughtful. Sheriff's wife, my patient. Very sick last winter influenza. I helped when doctor gave up. She lives because of old medicine, old knowledge. She tapped her fingers against her teacup. Reynolds remembers this debt. This new information cast the sheriff's warning in a different light. Perhaps his conscience truly was troubling him, his gratitude for his wife's recovery outweighing his loyalty to Blackwood. Even if Reynolds might help, I still need legal expertise to challenge Blackwood's claim, Maggie said. Edith suggested approaching Harold Jenkins at the land office, but that seems risky. My niece arrives tomorrow, Clara said unexpectedly. Mei Lin, studied law in San Francisco. First Chinese woman admitted to California bar. Maggie stared in surprise. Your niece is a lawyer. You never mentioned her before. A rare smile crossed Clara's face. Some secrets protect those we love. Mei Lin's journey not easy. Many obstacles for woman lawyer, more for Chinese woman. The smile faded. She comes because I sent telegram after Patrick died. Told her you might need legal help. The revelation that Clara had anticipated her need for legal assistance weeks ago was both touching and slightly unsettling. You suspected Blackwood's involvement in Patrick's death from the beginning. Not suspected. Knew. Clara's dark eyes held ancient wisdom. Some men's evil leaves mark like disease. I have seen such men before in old country and knew. Pattern always same. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Clara rose, moving to the window to check the visitor's identity before opening the door. Samuel Grant stood on the porch, hat in hand, his expression serious. "Mrs. Wu, Mrs. Sullivan, I hope I'm not interrupting." Clara admitted him with cautious courtesy, her assessment of the agent clearly ongoing. Grant declined the offer of tea, remaining standing as he addressed them both. "I've been making inquiries about Blackwood's recent activities," he began without preamble. "There's been unusual movement of funds through his accounts, large sums transferred from Denver and Cheyenne, and he's been hiring men, not local cowboys, but professional gunmen from outside the territory." Alarm flared in Maggie's chest. "He's preparing for something." Grant nodded grimly. "I believe he's accelerating whatever operation he's been planning. The timing suggests he's concerned about exposure, perhaps because of our conversation at the saloon, perhaps because of something else." Aggie exchanged a glance with Clara, silently debating how much to share with Grant. The agent noticed the look. "Mrs. Sullivan, I understand your caution, but partial information hampers my ability to help you." He spread his hands in a gesture of openness. "I've shown my cards, told you who I am, what I'm investigating. I need you to do the same." The plea was reasonable, and yet Maggie hesitated. The boundary fraud and potential silver discovery were powerful weapons against Blackwood, but only if deployed correctly. Sharing them prematurely might undermine their effectiveness. "I visited Edith Parker today," she said, finally offering a measured truth. She provided historical context. For the note, Patrick left the reference to B&B 1869. It refers to an original boundary marker from the territorial survey, one that apparently contradicts current property lines. Grant's eyebrows rose. "Boundary disputes. That's more complex than I anticipated." He paced a few steps, thinking. Still, it fits with Blackwood's pattern of land acquisition. If he's been systematically purchasing properties based on knowledge of their true value, the dispute goes deeper than that. Maggie continued, deciding that partial disclosure served her interests better than complete secrecy. According to Edith, the original survey of Millbrook was deliberately altered by Harrison Blackwood's father. The official maps filed with the Territorial Land Office don't match the actual geography. Grant stopped pacing, his expression sharpening with interest. "That would constitute fraud on a massive scale. If proven, it could invalidate property claims throughout the region." He studied Maggie intently. "And you believe your husband found evidence of this fraud?" "A boundary marker on our property that corresponds to the original accurate survey line," Maggie confirmed. "Combined with the geological formations he noted the potential silver deposit, it explains why Blackwood was so determined to acquire our land, and why Patrick's discovery made him dangerous." Grant absorbed this information, his mind visibly working through its implications. "This changes my approach," he said finally. "Banking fraud and embezzlement are significant crimes, but they're primarily paper violations. Falsifying territorial surveys and potentially arranging murders to cover it up, that's a different magnitude entirely." "Can the Treasury Department pursue such charges?" Maggie asked. "Not directly," Grant admitted, "but I have contacts in the Justice Department who can, and evidence of financial crimes can be leveraged to obtain warrants for broader investigations." He regarded Maggie thoughtfully. "Mrs. Sullivan, I believe our interests are even more aligned than I initially thought. Your husband's discoveries could be the key to bringing down not just Harrison Blackwood, but the entire corrupt network he's built." The possibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. Maggie glanced at Clara, whose expression remained carefully neutral before responding. "I'm willing to work with you, Mr. Grant, but I need guarantees. My primary concern is securing my property rights and ensuring my child's future. Justice for Patrick is important, but not at the expense of what he was trying to protect." Grant nodded, accepting the terms. "Fair enough. My priority is building a case that will stand up in federal court. If that case happens to secure your property rights in the process, so much the better." He glanced at the window where night had fully fallen. "I should go. My continued presence here will draw attention." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Blackwood has scheduled a town meeting for tomorrow afternoon, supposedly to discuss community improvements, but the timing is suspicious. I'd advise both of you to attend. Knowledge of his public moves may be as important as understanding his private machinations." After Grant departed, Clara secured the door and windows with her usual methodical care. "Agent asks much, offers little," she observed. "Careful with such men. Government justice not always same as personal justice." "I know," Maggie agreed, settling back at the table where Patrick's journal and Edith's books lay waiting. "But his resources and authority could be valuable, and his investigation gives us cover for our own inquiries." Clara nodded, accepting the pragmatic approach. "Tomorrow brings new pieces to puzzle. My niece arrives on morning stage, town meeting in afternoon, much movement, much opportunity for both sides." As they prepared for bed, Maggie felt the weight of the day's discoveries pressing against her mind. The scope of what she faced had expanded dramatically from seeking justice for Patrick to potentially unraveling the fraudulent foundation of Millbrook itself. The stakes were higher, the danger greater, but so too was the possibility of true resolution. That night, for the first time since Patrick's death, Maggie dreamed not of loss, but of justice. A future where truth prevailed, and her child inherited a legacy untainted by corruption. The dream sustained her through the darkness, a beacon of possibility, in a landscape shadowed by decades of deception. The morning stage arrived precisely at 9, dust billowing around the 6-horse team as the driver expertly guided them to a halt before the Millbrook Hotel. Clara and Maggie waited among the small crowd that always gathered for the stage's arrival. The tri-weekly connection to the outside world was Millbrook's primary source of newsmail and fresh faces. "How will we recognize your niece?" Maggie asked, scanning the stage's windows for passengers. "She recognizes us," Clara replied confidently. "Eyes like hawk, that one, always watching." The driver secured the brake and jumped down to open the door, assisting the first passenger, a middle-aged man in a business suit, who surveyed the town with the calculating gaze of a traveling salesman. The second passenger was an elderly woman helped down with extra care, likely returning from visiting family. The third passenger emerged without assistance, declining the driver's offered hand, with a polite but firm shake of her head. Mei-Lin Wu stood perhaps 5 feet 4 inches, her posture erect and dignified, despite the dust of travel that coated her plain, well-tailored traveling suit. She carried a leather satchel in one gloved hand, her dark hair arranged in a neat bun beneath a modest hat. What struck Maggie most, however, were her eyes, keen and intelligent, missing nothing as they swept over the assembled crowd. Those eyes found Clara immediately, a flash of recognition and affection, warming their observant coolness. Mei-Lin made her way through the crowd with deliberate grace, ignoring the curious stares her presence inevitably attracted. A Chinese woman traveling alone was unusual enough. One dressed in Western clothing and carrying a lawyer's satchel was unprecedented in Millbrook. "Aunt?" She greeted Clara in English, bowing slightly before accepting the older woman's embrace. Her accent was minimal, her diction precise and educated. Niece, Clara responded, obvious pride in her voice. Journey was good. Uneventful, which is all one can reasonably hope for, Maylin replied with a small smile. She turned to Maggie, extending her hand in the Western fashion. Mrs. Sullivan, I presume. My aunt has written of your situation. I'm very sorry for your loss. The formality and composure of the greeting belied the young woman's obvious fatigue from travel. Maggie accepted the handshake, noting the firm grip. Thank you for coming all this way. Your aunt speaks highly of your legal expertise. Maylin's expression revealed nothing, but her eyes assessed Maggie thoroughly. Let's reserve judgment on my expertise until we've discussed your case properly. For now, I would appreciate a chance to refresh myself after the journey. They collected Maylin's trunk from the stage and made their way back to Clara's house, aware of the curious glances that followed them. News of the Chinese lawyer's arrival would spread through Millbrook within hours, inevitably reaching Blackwood's ears. Once inside, with the door securely closed, Maylin's formal demeanor softened slightly. She removed her hat and gloves, accepting the tea Clara immediately prepared. I researched Patrick Sullivan's death before leaving San Francisco, she said without preamble, addressing Maggie directly. The official report lists it as an accident, but the circumstances are suspicious at best, especially given the timing in relation to the property foreclosure proceedings. Maggie wasn't surprised by this directness. It matched what Clara had told her about her niece's methodical approach. The timing wasn't coincidental, she confirmed. Patrick discovered something that threatened Blackwood, something worth killing for. Over the next hour, Maggie shared everything she had learned. Patrick's hidden note, the journal entries about unusual rock formations, Edith's revelations about the altered survey boundaries, and the potential silver deposits. Maylin listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound book. This is more complex than I anticipated, she said when Maggie finished, and potentially more significant. We're not just dealing with a wrongful death or property dispute, but systematic fraud that undermines the legal foundation of land ownership throughout the region. Can such fraud be proven after so many years? Maggie asked the practical question that had been nagging at her since Edith's revelations. Maylin considered this her expression thoughtful. American property law places great emphasis on documentation, but physical evidence can supersede paper records in certain circumstances. If we can locate the original boundary marker your husband found, and if it can be authenticated as part of the 1869 survey, we have a starting point. Blackwood controls the property now, Maggie pointed out. His men would prevent any attempt to search for the marker. Legal channels exist for obtaining access to disputed property, Maylin replied. However, given Blackwood's influence locally, we may need to pursue alternative approaches. She glanced at her aunt. Clara mentioned a federal agent is also investigating Blackwood. Maggie nodded, explaining Grant's role and the information he'd shared about Blackwood's criminal activities across territorial lines. Maylin's expression remained neutral, but Maggie sensed a subtle shift in her assessment. Federal involvement complicates matters. Treasury agents have specific jurisdictions and priorities that may not align with your personal justice. That's what your aunt said, Maggie acknowledged. But his resources and authority could be valuable allies. Or dangerous complications, Maylin countered. In my experience, federal cases prioritize clean convictions over messy truths. They may be willing to sacrifice certain aspects of justice, like your property rights, to secure their preferred charges. The assessment was coolly pragmatic, reflecting a sophistication about legal maneuvering that Maggie hadn't expected. What do you suggest, then? Maylin closed her notebook, decision apparently reached. We pursue parallel strategies. I'll begin the legal groundwork for challenging the property transfer based on the boundary dispute. Meanwhile, we need to locate and document the boundary marker your husband found ideally, with witnesses whose testimony would be credible in court. And Blackwood's town meeting this afternoon? Maggie asked. Grant suggested we attend. Absolutely, Mei Lin agreed. Public forums reveal vulnerabilities that private investigations might miss. And my presence will send a message that you're not without resources. A hint of steel entered her voice. Blackwood should understand that his actions now face scrutiny beyond his sphere of influence. The pragmatic confidence in her approach reassured Maggie. Where Grant offered vague promises of federal justice, Mei Lin provided concrete legal strategies focused specifically on securing her rights. There's something else to consider, Maggie said, recalling Reynolds's warning. Blackwood is offering rewards for information about documents Patrick might have left behind. He knows my husband discovered something, but not exactly what. That gives us a temporary advantage, Mei Lin noted, but it also confirms his desperation. She glanced at Clara. "And is your home secure? Documents like these would be devastating in the wrong hands." Clara nodded toward a floorboard near the hearth. "Hidden space beneath. Not perfect, but better than most." "We should make copies of the essential documents," Mei Lin suggested. "Store them separately as insurance." The morning passed in careful preparation, Mei Lin reviewing the legal aspects of mining claims and boundary disputes, Clara preparing herbal remedies she claimed would strengthen mind for coming battle, and Maggie studying Patrick's journal with renewed purpose, searching for any additional clues he might have left. As midday approached, Clara served a simple meal while they discussed strategy for the town meeting. "Observe only," Mei Lin advised Maggie. "Let Blackwood reveal his intentions without provocation. My presence beside you will communicate that you have legal representation without directly challenging him yet." "And if he confronts me?" Maggie asked, recalling the humiliation at the saloon. "Deflect, don't engage," Mei Lin replied. "This is an information-gathering opportunity, not a confrontation." She paused, considering. "However, if he directly references your husband's death or property, a carefully worded question about the original survey boundaries might be valuable just to gauge his reaction." The clock on Clara's mantel chimed 1, signaling time to prepare for the meeting scheduled for 2 o'clock in the town hall. As Maggie changed into her best remaining dress, still shabby compared to what she once owned, but clean and dignified, she felt a strange calm descend. After days of reaction and discovery, she was finally taking proactive steps toward justice. The town hall, located beside the church at the center of Millbrook, was already filling when they arrived. Maggie noted the careful social stratification of the seating. Blackwood's allies and business associates occupied the front rows, while ordinary townspeople filled the middle section. The rear seats, where Clara led them, held those of lower social standing miners' ranch hands and the few non-white residents of Millbrook. Mei Lin's presence drew immediate attention, whispers spreading through the assembled crowd. Her composure never wavered as she took her seat beside Maggie, her leather satchel placed precisely on her lap, her expression one of professional interest rather than discomfort. Grant was already present, positioned near the middle of the hall, where he could observe without drawing undue attention. He acknowledged Maggie with a nearly imperceptible nod, his gaze lingering curiously on Mei Lin before returning to his pose as an interested journalist. At precisely 2 o'clock, the side door opened and Harrison Blackwood strode in, followed by Sheriff Reynolds and Mayor Wallace, a figurehead whose primary qualification for office was his unwavering support for Blackwood's initiatives. Blackwood wore a suit even finer than usual, his appearance calculated to impress and intimidate. "Good afternoon, friends and neighbors," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "Thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to discuss Millbrook's future. As many of you know, I've always believed in this town's potential, even when others wrote it off as just another failed mining settlement. Murmurs of agreement rose from his supporters in the front rows. Blackwood smiled a practiced expression of benevolent authority. Today, I'm pleased to announce a series of investments that will secure Millbrook's prosperity for generations to come. He paused, surveying the crowd with the satisfaction of a man who knows his words carry weight. First, the expansion of the Blackwood Hotel, creating jobs for at least 20 additional workers. Second, improvements to the main street, including proper drainage systems and wooden sidewalks. And third, most exciting of all, the reopening of mining operations in the Northern Hills. This last announcement sent a ripple of genuine surprise through the crowd. The mines had been abandoned years ago when the initial claims proved disappointing. What had changed to make them viable again? Recent geological surveys, Blackwood continued, as if anticipating the question, have identified promising new veins that were overlooked during the initial rush. Modern extraction methods make these deposits economically viable in ways they weren't before. Maggie felt her heart rate accelerate. The northern hills bordered the Sullivan Ranch, specifically the area where Patrick had noted unusual rock formations and found the boundary marker. Blackwood wasn't just consolidating his hold on the town, he was preparing to exploit the silver deposits Patrick had discovered. These initiatives require cooperation and investment from all of us. Blackwood went on his tone, shifting to one of serious community responsibility. To that end, I'm proposing a special assessment on local businesses to fund the street improvements and the formation of a new mining corporation in which all citizens can purchase shares. Mayor Wallace stepped forward. At this point, his enthusiasm clearly rehearsed. Mr. Blackwood has generously offered to match every dollar invested by Millbrook residents with $3 of his own capital. This is an unprecedented opportunity for our community. The calculated nature of the performance was obvious to Maggie, though many in the audience seemed genuinely impressed. Blackwood was offering the illusion of partnership while ensuring he maintained controlling interest in the venture. More importantly, he was creating a financial incentive for the townspeople to support his plans, and by extension, to oppose anyone who might threaten them. Questions followed, most from obvious plants, who asked exactly the right prompts for Blackwood to elaborate on his generosity and vision. Throughout it all, Mei Lin observed with the detached interest of a scientist studying an unfamiliar species, while Clara remained impassive, her thoughts hidden behind years of practiced inscrutability. Finally, a question from a genuine townsperson, Harold Jenkins from the land office, the man Edith had suggested might be sympathetic to their cause. Mr. Blackwood, Jenkins began, his voice steady, despite the attention suddenly focused on him. These mining claims you're reopening, they're based on the original territorial surveys. Correct? Some of us have heard rumors about well discrepancies in the old boundary lines. A momentary flash of something anger-concern crossed Blackwood's face before his smile reasserted itself. An excellent question, Mr. Jenkins. As you know, property boundaries in the early territorial days were sometimes imprecisely marked. However, all current mining claims are fully documented and legally recorded with both the county and territorial offices. His gaze swept the room, briefly lingering on Maggie. Any suggestion of impropriety in these records would be not only false, but potentially libelous. The warning was clear, and Jenkins subsided, though Maggie noted he did not look convinced. The meeting continued with discussions of timelines and logistical details, but the essential information had been revealed. Blackwood was accelerating his plans to exploit the silver deposits using the town's economic interests as both cover and shield against potential opposition. As the formal portion of the meeting concluded and people began to mingle, Maggie noticed Grant making his way casually toward them. Before he could reach their position, however, Blackwood himself approached, his smile fixed firmly in place. "Mrs. Sullivan," he greeted her with artificial warmth, "I'm pleased you could attend. I've been meaning to speak with you about your late husband's property." "Former property," Maggie corrected, keeping her tone neutral, as Mei Lin had advised, "since you've claimed ownership through foreclosure." "A regrettable business necessity," Blackwood replied smoothly. "However, in light of the developments discussed today, I might be willing to reconsider certain arrangements." His gaze shifted to Mei Lin, curiosity evident. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure." Mei Lin extended her hand professionally. "Mei Lin Wu, attorney at law. I'm representing Mrs. Sullivan in matters related to her husband's estate." If Blackwood was surprised by the introduction of a female Chinese lawyer, he concealed it well. "I wasn't aware Mrs. Sullivan had engaged legal counsel, though I'm not sure what complex legal matters a widow with no property might require." "Wrongful death investigations often involve complexities beyond property considerations," Mei Lin replied evenly, "as do challenges to fraudulent foreclosures based on original boundary disputes." The direct reference to both Patrick's death and the boundary issue struck home. Blackwood's smile tightened, though his composure didn't crack entirely. "Strong accusations require strong evidence, Miss Wu. I trust you understand the legal implications of unfounded claims." "I understand the legal implications of all my actions, Mr. Blackwood. It's my professional obligation." Mei Lin's calm was unshakable, her gaze steady. "As is my duty to thoroughly investigate any matter affecting my client's interests, including discrepancies between recorded property lines and original survey markers." The reference to survey markers visibly unsettled Blackwood, though he recovered quickly. "Well, this sounds like a conversation best continued in a more private setting. Perhaps you'd both join me for dinner at the hotel this evening." 7 o'clock. "Unfortunately, my client's condition makes evening engagements difficult." Mei Lin declined smoothly, nodding toward Maggie's pregnancy. "Perhaps tomorrow morning would be more suitable." Of course. The comfort of expectant mothers is paramount." Blackwood's solicitous tone couldn't disguise the calculation in his eyes. "Tomorrow at 10, then. My office at the hotel." He nodded to them both and moved away, immediately engaging Mayor Wallace in animated conversation. "He's rattled," Mei Lin observed quietly. The reference to survey markers struck a nerve. "He's also trying to buy time," Maggie noted. "Figure out exactly what we know and how much evidence we have." "Precisely. Which is why we need to locate that boundary marker before our meeting tomorrow." Mei Lin glanced around the hall where people were gradually dispersing. "The land office closes at 5. We should speak with Jenkins while we have the opportunity." They made their way across the room to where Jenkins stood examining a map of the proposed street improvements. He looked up at their approach, recognition and wariness crossing his face. "Mrs. Sullivan," he acknowledged with a nod. "I was sorry to hear about your husband. Patrick was a good man." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. This is Mei Lin Wu, my attorney." Maggie kept her voice low, conscious of potential eavesdroppers. "We'd like to speak with you about some land records, if you have a moment." Jenkins glanced around nervously. "Not here. The land office in 30 minutes. Use the back entrance." Without waiting for a response, he moved away, engaging another townsperson in loud conversation about drainage requirements. As they prepared to leave the hall, Grant intercepted them near the door. "Interesting developments," he murmured, maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. Blackwood's accelerating his timeline. The mining announcement wasn't supposed to happen for weeks. He's responding to perceived threats. Mei Lin replied, assessing Grant with the same cool evaluation she'd applied to Blackwood. Your presence, my arrival. Mrs. Sullivan's investigations, he's feeling pressured. Grant nodded, accepting the analysis without questioning who Mei Lin was or what her role entailed. Pressure makes men careless, but it also makes them dangerous. He glanced meaningfully at Maggie. Be careful with Jenkins. He's walking a delicate line between cooperation and self-preservation. With that cryptic warning, he tipped his hat and departed, maintaining his cover as a curious journalist rather than a federal agent. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Millbrook's dusty streets. Clara, who had remained silent throughout the exchanges, finally spoke. Many players moving now, board becoming crowded. Indeed, Mei Lin agreed. And the next few moves will determine whether we're playing chess or simply being played. She straightened her already impeccable posture. Let's see what Mr. Jenkins has to offer before we commit to any strategy. As they made their way toward the land office, Maggie felt the baby shift restlessly within her. She placed a protective hand over her belly, silently renewing her vow to secure justice and safety for this child who would never know their father. The game was indeed becoming more complex, the stakes higher, but so too was her determination to see it through to its rightful conclusion. Behind them, the town hall emptied as Millbrook's citizens returned to their daily routines, most unaware that the foundations of their community, both literal and figurative, were about to be challenged in ways that would reshape their shared future. The truth buried for decades was finally working its way to the surface, like water finding its inevitable path downhill, carving away deception to reveal the bedrock of justice beneath. The land office occupied a small brick building between the bank and the telegraph office, its weathered sign barely legible after years of Montana sun and winter storms. As instructed, Maggie, Mei Lin, and Clara approached from the alley behind, finding the back door unlocked as promised. Inside the office was a testament to the bureaucratic nature of land management walls lined with maps of varying ages, shelves stuffed with ledgers recording property transactions stretching back to Millbrook's founding, and a large central desk buried under stacks of documents awaiting processing. The musty scent of old paper filled the air, mingling with the sharper smell of ink and dust. Harold Jenkins waited by a small table in the corner, nervously arranging several folders. He glanced up at their entrance relief, briefly crossing his face, before anxiety reasserted itself. Mrs. Sullivan, he greeted, her voice hushed despite the empty office. Miss Wu, Mrs. Wu, thank you for your discretion. He gestured to the chairs around the table. We don't have much time. Blackwood has eyes everywhere, and questions about land records won't go unnoticed for long. As they settled into the offered seats, Maggie studied Jenkins more carefully. He was perhaps 50, with the pale complexion of a man who spent his life indoors among papers rather than working the land they described. His hands bore the telltale ink stains of his profession, and wire-rimmed spectacles perched on a nose that had been broken and imperfectly reset at some point in his past. Mr. Jenkins, Mei Lin began, her professional demeanor establishing immediate authority. We understand you might have information regarding the original territorial surveys of this region, specifically those conducted in 1869. Jenkins's eyes widened slightly. So it's true, he murmured, almost to himself. Patrick found one of the markers. The confirmation sent a ripple of excitement through Maggie. You know about the boundary discrepancies? Rumors, mostly. Whispers passed down through the years. Jenkins pulled one of the folders closer, opening it to reveal a yellowed map. My father worked for the land office before me. He always maintained that the official survey had been adjusted to benefit certain interests. Harrison Black, Mei Lin stated rather than asked. Jenkins nodded. Black controlled early Millbrook through money and fear, not unlike his son's methods today. My father tried to investigate the discrepancies after discovering some irregularities in the records, but he trailed off, pain etching new lines in his face. Blackwood's father had him removed from his position, Maggie guessed, recalling Edith's similar story about Patrick's father. Removed from more than that, Jenkins replied bitterly. He was found drowned in Miller Creek 2 days after he started asking questions about the original survey markers. The official ruling was accident, too much whiskey, a dark night, a slippery bank. His voice hardened. He hadn't touched a drop of alcohol in 15 years. The parallels to Patrick's death hung unspoken in the air between them. Another inconvenient man, another suspicious accident, the Blackwood dynasty protecting its secrets through generations. We need access to the original survey records, Mei Lin said, redirecting the conversation to practical matters. The 1869 documents specifically. Jenkins shook his head regretfully. That's the problem. The originals disappeared decades ago, likely destroyed by Black himself. What remains are copies of the altered versions. He tapped the map before them. This is the earliest version in our records dated 1871, after the corrections were already made. Disappointment threatened to overwhelm Maggie's newfound hope. Without the original surveys proving, the boundary manipulation would be nearly impossible. However, Jenkins continued, sliding another folder forward, my father kept personal notes about the discrepancies he discovered. He suspected that at least 3 of the original boundary markers remained in place, including one on what is now the Sullivan Ranch. He opened the folder to reveal hand-drawn sketches and notes, the handwriting faded but legible. According to his investigations, Miller Creek's true course runs nearly a mile east of its position on official maps, which would place significant portions of Blackwood's mining claims on property that was never legally his to claim. Mei Lin studied the notes intently, her expression revealing nothing. These are helpful, but without the original survey documents or physical evidence of the actual boundaries, they're essentially hearsay from a legal perspective. The physical marker Patrick found would be evidence, Maggie pointed out. If we could access it, document its existence and location, which brings us to our primary obstacle, Mei Lin replied. Blackwood now controls the property where the marker is located and would prevent any attempt to examine it. Jenkins cleared his throat nervously. Actually, there might be a way. He unrolled a larger map across the table. The Sullivan Ranch borders public land to the north, technically under territorial jurisdiction, rather than private ownership. If the marker is close enough to this boundary, you might be able to access it without trespassing on what Blackwood now claims as his property. Maggie leaned forward, studying the map. The northern pasture where Patrick had noted finding the marker was indeed close to the territorial land. How accurate are the current boundary lines between the ranch and territorial land? Mei Lin asked, the lawyer's mind immediately identifying the potential legal complication. Jenkins grimaced. That's the irony. Those boundaries are based on the altered survey as well. If the original survey were correct, the public land would extend significantly further south, encompassing much of what Blackwood now claims. A perfect circle of fraud, Clara observed quietly. False lines create false claims which defend false boundaries. Precisely, Jenkins agreed. Breaking that circle requires physical evidence that predates the fraud, like an original boundary marker. Maggie felt a renewed sense of purpose. If they could locate the marker Patrick had found, they might break the entire fraudulent foundation of Blackwood's empire. There's something else you should know, Jenkins added, his voice dropping even lower. 2 days ago, Blackwood sent men to the northern section of the ranch, the area where Patrick likely found the marker. They've been digging and searching for something. I believe he's trying to locate and remove any physical evidence of the original boundaries before it can be used against him. Alarm shot through Maggie. How much time do we have? Not much, Jenkins admitted. They've been working systematically across the northern pasture. If they haven't found it yet, they will soon. Mei Lin closed the folder of notes. Decision apparently reached. We need to move quickly. Tonight, if possible. Tonight, Maggie repeated, surprised by the sudden urgency. Blackwood expects to meet us tomorrow at 10. He'll be prepared with legal countermeasures by then. If we're going to find this marker, it must be before he realizes we're actively searching for it. Mei Lin turned to Jenkins. Can you provide detailed directions to the area where the marker is most likely located? Jenkins nodded, pulling out a fresh sheet of paper. Based on my father's notes and the proximity to the public land boundary, I believe it would be here. He marked a spot on the map. There's an old trapper's trail that approaches from the territorial land. It's seldom used now, but would allow access without crossing the ranch property directly. As Jenkins sketched detailed directions, Clara spoke up unexpectedly. Sheriff Reynolds might help. The suggestion drew surprised looks from everyone at the table. The sheriff? Jenkins asked skeptically. He's Blackwood's man. Not entirely, Clara replied. His wife lives because of my medicine, and he warned Maggie yesterday about Blackwood's interest in Patrick's documents. He walks narrow path between duty and conscience. Mei Lin considered this. A law enforcement witness to the boundary marker would significantly strengthen our case, but approaching Reynolds directly risks alerting Blackwood. I may be able to help with that, Jenkins offered. Reynolds stops by the office every Friday afternoon today to review new property registrations. Its routine wouldn't raise suspicions. If you happen to be here when he arrives, and the possibility of securing the sheriff's cooperation, or at least his witness, was too valuable to ignore. They agreed to return at 4 o'clock, when Reynolds typically conducted his weekly review. There's one more thing, Jenkins said as they prepared to leave. The federal agent Grant. He was here yesterday asking questions about property records related to Blackwood's holdings. What kind of questions? Mei Lin asked, instantly alert. Specifically about mining claims and mineral rights. He seemed particularly interested in the legal procedures for challenging property boundaries. Jenkins adjusted his spectacles nervously. I didn't tell him about the altered survey, wasn't sure how much to trust him, but he's clearly pursuing a similar line of investigation. This information required careful consideration. Grant's parallel investigation could either strengthen their position or complicate it, depending on his ultimate objectives. Thank you for the warning, Mei Lin said, and for your assistance today. I understand the risk you're taking. Jenkins's expression grew solemn. My father died trying to expose this fraud. Patrick Sullivan died for the same reason. If there's any chance to finally bring the truth to light, I'll take whatever risk necessary. They left as they had arrived through the back door, careful to ensure no one observed their departure. As they made their way back to Clara's house, Maggie felt both hope and trepidation building in equal measure. They had a plan now, tentative and dangerous, but a path forward nonetheless. What do you think of Jenkins's information? She asked Mei Lin, once they were safely inside Clara's home. Consistent with what Edith Parker told you, the lawyer replied, removing her hat and placing it precisely on the sideboard. More importantly, it provides legal context for challenging Blackwood's claims. If we can document the existence and location of an original boundary marker, we establish grounds for questioning all subsequent property transfers based on the altered survey. And Reynolds, do you believe he might help us? Mei Lin glanced at her aunt, who was preparing tea with her usual methodical care. Clara's judgment of character is rarely mistaken. If she believes the sheriff maintains some independence from Blackwood, I'm inclined to accept that assessment. She paused, considering. However, we should prepare for the possibility that approaching him backfires. And Grant, Maggie pressed, should we inform him of our plans? Not yet, Mei Lin decided. His objectives may align with ours in opposing Blackwood, but his methods and priorities could differ significantly. Federal agents tend to focus on whatever charges are easiest to prove in court, not necessarily those that provide the most complete justice to victims. Clara brought tea to the table, her expression thoughtful. Agent hunts bigger prey than local land fraud. He seeks to trap Blackwood for crimes across territories. Our concerns may be small in such calculation. Exactly, Mei Lin agreed. We need to secure our evidence and legal position before involving federal authorities. Once we have documented the boundary marker and established the legal basis for challenging Blackwood's claim to your property, we'll be negotiating from strength rather than dependence. The pragmatic approach made sense to Maggie. While Grant had been helpful in providing information about Blackwood's criminal activities, his primary focus was building a federal case, not securing her property rights or justice for Patrick. What about tonight? She asked. The search for the boundary marker. I'll go, Mei Lin stated firmly. With Jenkins's directions and description of the marker, I should be able to locate it. Not alone, Maggie objected. It's my husband's discovery, my property. Your condition makes a nighttime expedition across rough terrain unwise. Mei Lin pointed out, glancing meaningfully at Maggie's advanced pregnancy. I've worked that land for 8 years, Maggie countered. I know every hill and hollow better than anyone, and Patrick's journal contains specific notes about where he found the marker details that might make the difference between success and failure. Clara, who had been listening silently, intervened. Both go. I accompany. 3 sets of eyes better than one. 3 witnesses stronger than single voice. Mei Lin looked ready to object, but something in her aunt's steady gaze apparently changed her mind. Very well, but we take precautions. Mrs. Sullivan remains on territorial land, directing our search from a safe position, and we all carry protection. She glanced at Maggie. I assume the agent provided you with something defensive? Maggie nodded, somewhat surprised by Mei Lin's perception. A small revolver, but I've never fired one. I have, Mei Lin said simply, offering no explanation for this unexpected skill. We'll hope such measures prove unnecessary, but Blackwood has already demonstrated his willingness to eliminate threats to his interests. The reminder of the danger they faced sobered them all. They spent the remaining hours before their meeting with Reynolds reviewing Patrick's journal entries about the northern pasture, memorizing Jenkins's directions, and preparing for a night expedition that could change everything or cost them their lives if discovered. Sheriff Reynolds arrived at the land office precisely at 4. His weathered face registering brief surprise at finding Maggie, Mei Lin, and Clara already seated with Jenkins at the document table. He hesitated in the doorway, one hand instinctively moving toward his holstered revolver, before recognizing there was no immediate threat. Mrs. Sullivan, he acknowledged, removing his hat, as courtesy dictated. Ladies, Jenkins, wasn't expecting a gathering. Jenkins rose nervously. Just finishing some business related to Mrs. Sullivan's husband's estate, Sheriff. Miss Wu is her legal representative. Reynolds studied Mei Lin with frank curiosity, clearly not accustomed to female lawyers, let alone Chinese ones. To his credit, he showed no overt disrespect, merely nodding in acknowledgement. Convenient timing, he observed, caution evident in his tone. I have my weekly review to conduct. Actually, Sheriff, Maggie said, deciding directness was their best approach, we hope to speak with you privately. Reynolds's expression revealed nothing, but his posture stiffened slightly. About justice, Maggie replied simply. For my husband and for others who have suffered similar fates. A complex emotion crossed Reynolds's face, something between guilt and resignation. He glanced toward the door, then deliberately closed it and turned the key in the lock. 5 minutes, he said, removing his hat and placing it on the desk. Then, I never heard whatever you're about to say. Mei Lin took the lead, her professional manner establishing immediate authority despite her gender and ethnicity, two characteristics that would normally diminish her standing in a man like Reynolds's estimation. Sheriff, we have reason to believe Patrick Sullivan's death was not accidental, but rather the result of his discovery of evidence that threatens Harrison Blackwood's land claims. She laid out the essential facts with precision. The altered survey boundaries, the missing original documents. Patrick's discovery of an authentic boundary marker, and the likely connection to silver deposits on the Sullivan property. Reynolds listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When Mei Lin finished, he remained silent for several long moments, absently tracing a scar on his knuckle with his thumb. You're suggesting a conspiracy stretching back decades, he finally said, involving not just Blackwood, but his father before him. Fraud on a scale that would undermine property rights throughout the region. The evidence points in that direction, Mei Lin confirmed, and suggests a pattern of eliminating those who discover the truth, including Patrick Sullivan, Mr. Jenkins's father, and potentially others. Reynolds's gaze shifted to Clara. Your husband worked on the railroad during the original surveys. Didn't he, Mrs. Wu, had some connection to the survey teams? Clara nodded, surprise flickering briefly across her usually composed features. He carried equipment, dug marker posts, kept records of where markers placed, and died rather suddenly as well as I recall. Reynolds continued revealing unexpected knowledge of local history. Fever, they said. Very sudden fever, Clara agreed, her eyes narrowing. For very healthy man. Reynolds sighed heavily, a man carrying a burden too long concealed. When I took this job 12 years ago, Millbrook was still recovering from the mining bust. Blackwood's father had just passed, leaving his son to take over the family enterprises. I was told to respect certain arrangements that kept the town functioning. He rubbed his jaw, decision apparently forming. But I never signed on for murder. Are you saying you have knowledge of Patrick Sullivan's death being deliberate? Mei Lin asked, careful to avoid leading the question. Knowledge, no. Suspicions, yes. Reynolds looked directly at Maggie. Your husband came to me about 3 days before his death, said he'd discovered something important about property boundaries, wanted to know the legal process for challenging established claims. He shook his head regretfully. I told him to take it to the territorial courts, keep it quiet locally until he had official backing. Next thing I hear, he's dead from a riding accident. The confirmation that Patrick had been actively seeking legal recourse before his death strengthened their case considerably. Sheriff, Maggie said, her voice steady, despite the emotion churning beneath. We believe the boundary marker Patrick discovered still exists on our property, the northern section near where it borders territorial land. We intend to locate and document it as evidence. Reynolds's expression sharpened. That's Blackwood land, now legally speaking. Entering would be trespassing. Not if accessed from the territorial side, Mei Lin countered, and not if the actual boundary line differs from current records due to fraud. Reynolds considered this legal nuance, clearly weighing his official duties against his private doubts. What exactly are you asking of me? Your presence, Mei Lin stated simply. As a law enforcement witness to the discovery and documentation of the boundary marker. Your testimony would significantly strengthen the legal challenge to Blackwood's claims. You're asking me to directly oppose the most powerful man in Millbrook, Reynolds observed, though his tone suggested consideration rather than refusal. The man who effectively controls my position and livelihood. I'm asking you to uphold the law, Mei Lin corrected gently. The actual law, not Blackwood's version of it. Reynolds fell silent again, internal conflict evident in his expression. Finally, he looked at Clara. Your treatments saved my Martha when the doctor said there was no hope. I owe you a debt I can't repay. His gaze shifted to Maggie. And I've wondered about your husband's death since it happened. Too convenient, too clean. He straightened, decision apparently reached. I won't actively participate in your search, can't risk being seen openly opposing Blackwood without solid evidence. But if you find this marker, get word to me. I'll come document it, officially provide the law enforcement verification you need for legal proceedings. It wasn't the full support they'd hoped for, but it was more than Maggie had expected. Reynolds was offering a compromise that maintained his official neutrality while providing crucial assistance if they succeeded. Thank you, Sheriff, she said sincerely. Reynolds reclaimed his hat, moving toward the door. Don't thank me yet. Blackwood has men watching the northern section of your ranch, the same area you're interested in. They're not just surveying for mining operations, they're looking for something specific. He unlocked the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. Be careful. Blackwood's father made problems disappear. His son learned the family business well. With that warning, he departed, leaving them to contemplate both the risk and potential reward of their planned expedition. He'll help, Jenkins observed once Reynolds was gone. Not openly, but he will. That's more than most would dare against Blackwood. It's enough, Mei Lin decided. His witness testimony, combined with documentation of the marker and the historical context provided by Edith Parker and your father's notes, creates a solid foundation for legal challenge. They finalized arrangements for the evening's expedition timing equipment, rendezvous points with Jenkins providing additional details about the old trapper's trail that would lead them to the likely location of the boundary marker. As dusk approached, they left the land office separately, Jenkins remaining behind to maintain appearances of normal business operations. The hours until nightfall passed with agonizing slowness. Clara prepared a simple but nourishing meal, insisting they would need their strength for the journey ahead. Mei Lin studied territorial property law with focused intensity, occasionally making notes in her small leather-bound book. Maggie reviewed Patrick's journal one final time, committing the relevant entries to memory in case they needed to leave the document behind for safety. As they prepared to depart, Clara distributed small packets of herbs to each of them. For energy, she explained, and clear thinking in darkness. Maggie tucked the packet into her pocket alongside Grant's revolver, hoping neither would be needed, but grateful for both precautions. Mei Lin, she noted, had her own small pistol concealed in a specially designed pocket of her practical dark skirt. The lawyer had changed from her formal attire into clothing more suitable for their expedition, still dignified, but allowing for movement across rough terrain. They left Clara's house shortly after 9, when full darkness had settled over Millbrook. Most townspeople were either at home or gathered at the saloon, leaving the streets relatively deserted. They kept to shadows and back alleys, avoiding the main thoroughfares where Blackwood's men might be watching. The journey to the edge of town passed without incident, but tension mounted as they approached the open country beyond. The night was clear stars, providing enough light to navigate, but not so much as to make them easily visible from a distance. The air carried the crisp edge of approaching autumn, a reminder that winter would soon make such expeditions impossible. 2 miles to the Trapper's Trail, Mei Lin noted, consulting Jenkins's directions. then another mile to where it approaches the property line. I know a shorter route, Maggie offered. Through the eastern meadow. It would save nearly a mile. Mei Lin hesitated, weighing efficiency against potential risk. Is it open ground visible from a distance? Partially, Maggie admitted. But at night, with the tree line for cover most of the way, we take safer path, Clara decided firmly. Better slow and sure than fast and caught. The wisdom of this approach was undeniable, though Maggie's impatience made the longer route frustrating. They proceeded carefully, Clara moving with surprising agility despite her age, Mei Lin displaying an unexpected familiarity with nighttime navigation, and Maggie drawing on years of experience working the land alongside Patrick. The trapper's trail proved more difficult to locate than Jenkins's directions had suggested, the old path having fallen into disuse, as the fur trade diminished. Eventually, Clara identified subtle signs of the former route, a deliberate gap in vegetation stones, arranged to mark a crossing over a small stream, blazes on trees long grown over, but still faintly visible to experienced eyes. Your husband mentioned this area specifically, Mei Lin asked, as they followed the faint trail northward. Maggie nodded, pointing ahead to where the land rose slightly, forming a natural ridgeline. The northern pasture begins just beyond that rise. Patrick noted unusual rock formations there, quartz veins exposed by erosion. And nearby a stone pyramid he didn't recognize at first, but later identified as an old survey marker. The B&B marker, Mei Lin confirmed. According to Jenkins, they were typically constructed as stone cairns, with metal plates embedded, marking significant boundary points. As they crested the ridge, the landscape opened before them, bathed in starlight. The northern pasture of the Sullivan Ranch stretched out gently, rolling grassland, interspersed with rocky outcroppings. In the distance, perhaps half a mile away, flickering light revealed the presence of a camp. "Blackwood's men," Maggie whispered, instinctively dropping lower. Mei Lin produced a small spyglass from her pocket, studying the distant campsite. 4 men, at least. They've been digging, see the disturbed earth around their position. Clara pointed to their left, where the land rose more sharply. High ground, better view, less visible approach. They adjusted their course, moving in a wide arc that kept the ridge between themselves and the distant camp. The terrain grew rougher as they approached the area where the territorial land bordered the ranch property, requiring careful footing and frequent pauses to ensure they remained undetected. "This should be it," Maggie said finally, consulting mental maps formed from Patrick's descriptions. The rock formations he described would be just ahead, near where that cluster of pine trees meets the grassland. They proceeded with heightened caution, aware that Blackwood's men might have posted sentries beyond the main camp. The quartz formations became visible as they drew closer, pale veins running through darker stone, catching the starlight like frozen lightning across the rocky outcroppings. "Patrick was right," Maggie whispered, examining the formations. "These are similar to those found near silver deposits in other regions." "The marker would be nearby," Mei Lin reminded her, focused on their primary objective. Jenkins said they were typically placed at notable landscape features that would remain stable over time. They separated slightly, each searching the immediate area for anything resembling a stone cairn or survey marker. The minutes stretched anxiously, each aware that dawn was still hours away, but discovery by Blackwood's men remained a constant threat. Here, Clara's urgent whisper drew them to a position near the largest quartz outcropping. She pointed to what initially appeared to be just another pile of rocks, but on closer inspection revealed deliberate construction. A roughly pyramidal cairn of stones partially collapsed on one side, but still recognizable as man-made. Mei Lin knelt beside it, careful not to disturb the structure. "This matches Jenkins's description," The metal plate should be embedded in the center stones. Maggie joined her heart, pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension. If this was indeed the boundary marker Patrick had discovered, they had found physical evidence of the survey fraud and potentially the key to reclaiming her property and securing justice for her husband's death. With careful movements, Mei Lin examined the cairn without disassembling it. "There," she said, indicating a glint of metal visible between two of the larger stones. "The plate." Using a small pocket knife, she gently cleared decades of accumulated dirt and lichen from around the metal surface, gradually revealing an official territorial survey marker. The inscription, though weathered, was still legible. B&B 1869, MCNE. Boundary and Benchmark 1869. Mei Lin translated, Miller Creek Northeast. This is it, an original survey marker establishing the true course of Miller Creek as the property boundary. Maggie felt a surge of vindication. Patrick had been right. The marker existed exactly where he'd described, providing physical evidence of the boundary manipulation that had allowed the Blackwood dynasty to control land that was never legally theirs. "We need to document its location precisely," Mei Lin said, producing a small notebook and pencil, "and make a rubbing of the plate inscription as evidence." As they worked to record their discovery, Clara suddenly stiffened, holding up a hand for silence. In the distance, voices carried on the night air, Blackwood's men moving in their direction. "They patrol area," Clara whispered, "searching methodically." "We need more time," Mei Lin insisted, still carefully making a rubbing of the metal plate. "The documentation must be complete to be legally valuable." "I'll draw them away," Maggie decided, already moving toward higher ground. "Create a distraction." "Too dangerous," Mei Lin objected, but Maggie was already beyond immediate reach. "Finish the documentation," Maggie called back softly. "I'll meet you at the rendezvous point." Before either Clara or Mei Lin could prevent her, Maggie moved quickly along the ridgeline, deliberately choosing a path that would make noise while leading away from their position. She dislodged a small cascade of stones, the clatter distinct in the night stillness. The voices in the distance stopped, then resumed with greater urgency. Flashlight beams swept across the landscape, searching for the source of the disturbance. Maggie continued moving, maintaining enough distance to avoid immediate capture, while drawing attention away from the boundary marker. The baby shifted uncomfortably within her, as if protesting this reckless plan, but she pressed on, determined to provide Mei Lin the time needed to complete their crucial documentation. The voices grew closer, flashlight beams more focused. Maggie ducked behind an outcropping, calculating her next move. She needed to lead the search party on a sufficient chase without being caught, a delicate balance made more challenging by her pregnant condition. A beam of light swept across her position, missing her by inches. She held her breath, pressing deeper into the shadows of the rocky shelter. The baby kicked sharply, causing her to gasp involuntarily. The sound, slight as it was, caught the attention of the nearest searcher. "Over here," a man's voice called. "I heard something." Footsteps approached her hiding place, the light now directly aimed at the rocks concealing her. Maggie felt for the revolver in her pocket, praying she wouldn't need to use it, but prepared to defend herself if necessary. Just as the searcher was about to round the outcropping, a bird call echoed from the opposite direction, a whippoorwill's distinctive song that was decidedly out of place in this season and terrain. The searcher hesitated, his attention diverted by this new anomaly. The call came again, more insistent, drawing the search party away from Maggie's position. She recognized Clara's strategy, using her knowledge of nature to create a more effective distraction than Maggie's noisy retreat had provided. Taking advantage of the diversion, Maggie slipped from her hiding place and moved carefully back toward their agreed rendezvous point, a stand of pines marking the clear border between ranch property and territorial land. Her progress was painfully slow, each step measured to avoid creating noise that might redirect the searchers' attention. As she approached the rendezvous point, a figure emerged from the shadows, causing her heart to race until she recognized Mei Lin's distinctive silhouette. "That was foolish," the lawyer admonished in a fierce whisper, "but effective." We completed the documentation, precise location rubbings of the inscription, measurements of the cairn, and notes on its relationship to the quartz formations. "Clara," Maggie asked anxiously, "creating an elaborate series of false trails," Mei Lin replied with a hint of admiration. "She has remarkable skills for someone her age." As if summoned by the mention, Clara materialized beside them, moving with the silent grace of someone accustomed to navigating hostile environments undetected. "We go," she said simply. They confused now, but not for long. They retreated along the trapper's trail, their pace faster now that their objective had been achieved. Behind them, they could hear Blackwood's men regrouping, their search pattern becoming more organized as they recovered from Clara's diversionary tactics. The return journey to Millbrook seemed both interminable and rushed, each of them acutely aware that their discovery would mean nothing if they were caught before reaching safety. They avoided the main roads into town, instead circling around to approach Clara's house from the least visible direction. It was well past midnight when they finally closed Clara's door behind them, the simple wooden barrier feeling like a fortress wall, separating them from the dangers they'd just navigated. Exhaustion hit Maggie suddenly, the combination of physical exertion, emotional strain, and her advanced pregnancy, leaving her lightheaded and trembling. Clara immediately guided her to a chair, pressing a cup of strengthening tea into her hands while Mei Lin secured their precious documentation. "We did it," Maggie said, a mixture of disbelief and triumph in her voice. "We found the marker. We have proof." "For the first step only," Mei Lin cautioned, though her own expression revealed satisfaction at their success. "Now we must leverage this evidence effectively. Blackwood will fight any challenge to his claims with every resource at his disposal." "But we have truth on our side," Maggie insisted. "Truth requires power to prevail." Clara observed her ancient wisdom tempering their victory. "Power of law, power of witness, power of those willing to stand against injustice." Mei Lin nodded agreement. "Our meeting with Blackwood tomorrow morning provides an opportunity to assess his awareness of our discovery. We should proceed as if he knows nothing, while being prepared for the possibility that his men have already reported disturbances near the boundary marker." The strategic approach made sense to Maggie, though she wondered how she would maintain composure facing the man she now believed was responsible for Patrick's death. "Rest now," Clara instructed, noting Maggie's exhaustion. "Tomorrow brings new battles, strength needed for both body and mind." Despite her racing thoughts, Maggie couldn't argue with the wisdom of this advice. The baby's well-being depended on her taking proper care of herself, regardless of the momentous discoveries and challenges that lay ahead. As she settled into bed, Maggie found herself touching Patrick's pocket watch, still carried close as both memento and talisman. "We found it," she whispered to his memory. "The marker, the proof you died protecting. I swear to you, Patrick, your death won't be in vain." Sleep came in fitful bursts, her dreams filled with boundary markers, silver veins gleaming in moonlight, and Patrick riding endlessly toward a horizon she could never quite reach. Morning brought new tension as they prepared for their meeting with Blackwood. Mei Lin, dressed in her most formal attire, the embodiment of professional legal authority, while Maggie wore her best remaining dress, determined to face Blackwood with dignity, despite her reduced circumstances. "Remember," Mei Lin advised as they walked toward the Blackwood Hotel, "our goal is information, not confrontation. We assess his knowledge probe for vulnerabilities but reveal nothing about our discovery unless strategically necessary. The Blackwood Hotel stood as a monument to its owner's prosperity and influence, 3 stories of imposing architecture dominating the main street, its facade freshly painted windows gleaming in the morning sun. The lobby featured imported carpets, polished wood, and brass fixtures that spoke of wealth unusual for a frontier town. The clerk at the front desk directed them to Blackwood's office on the 2nd floor, with obvious curiosity about their business. As they climbed the carpeted stairs, Maggie noted the framed photographs lining the wall, a visual history of Millbrook's development with Harrison Black, and later his son, prominently featured as the town's primary benefactors and visionaries. Blackwood's office door stood open, revealing a space designed to impress. Large windows overlooked the main street, giving its occupant a literal overview of his domain. The furniture was substantial, and clearly expensive bookshelves displayed leather-bound volumes that Maggie suspected were chosen more for appearance than content, and a large map of the region dominated one wall, the altered version naturally showing property lines that benefited Blackwood's interests. Harrison Blackwood himself sat behind a massive desk, his posture one of casual authority as he reviewed documents before him. He looked up at their arrival, his expression revealing nothing beyond polite acknowledgement. "Mrs. Sullivan, Miss Wu," he greeted them, rising with practiced courtesy. "Please be seated. Can I offer you refreshment, coffee, tea?" They declined the offer, taking the chairs positioned before his desk. Maggie noted the careful arrangement. Blackwood elevated slightly on a larger chair visitors positioned to look up at him. The morning sun through the windows behind him, casting his face in shadow while fully illuminating theirs. Every detail calculated to establish and maintain his dominant position. "I must admit," Blackwood began once they were seated, "I'm curious about the nature of your legal concerns. Mrs. Sullivan's situation, while unfortunate, seems straightforward from a legal perspective. The foreclosure proceedings were fully documented and executed according to territorial law." Mei Lin smiled, slightly unintimidated by his positioning or presumptions. "Legal matters are rarely as straightforward as they initially appear, Mr. Blackwood, particularly when they involve property boundaries established under questionable circumstances." A flicker of something concern irritation crossed Blackwood's face before his practiced charm reasserted itself. "Property boundaries. I'm afraid I don't follow your meaning, Miss Wu." "Let me be more specific." Mei Lin continued, her tone remaining professional rather than confrontational. "We've been examining the history of land surveys in the Millbrook region, particularly those conducted in 1869, and subsequently adjusted in official records." The deliberate pause on "adjusted" hit its mark. Blackwood's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the pen he held. "Historical surveys are fascinating, of course," he replied, his voice steady but lacking its previous casual confidence, "though I fail to see their relevance to Mrs. Sullivan's current situation." "Their relevance becomes clear when one considers that property claims throughout this region, including your own, are based on survey boundaries that may not reflect the original accurate assessments." Mei Lin's directness was tempered by her careful phrasing, suggesting possibilities rather than making accusations. Blackwood set down his pen, giving them his full attention now. "These are serious insinuations, Miss Wu. I hope you have substantial evidence to support them." "Evidence exists," Mei Lin replied simply, neither confirming nor denying their possession of it. "The question is how best to proceed given that evidence." Understanding dawned in Blackwood's eyes. This was not merely a legal challenge, but a negotiation. "I see," he said, leaning back slightly. "And what outcome would you consider satisfactory in this proceeding?" Mei Lin glanced at Maggie silently, yielding the response to her client. This was the moment to establish her primary objectives, what justice would look like from her perspective. Recognition of my rightful claim to the Sullivan Ranch, Maggie stated firmly. Compensation for improvements made to the property during our ownership, and acknowledgement of the true circumstances of my husband's death. The last item visibly unsettled Blackwood, though he quickly masked his reaction. Your husband's tragic accident has been officially documented, Mrs. Sullivan. Reopening that matter serves no constructive purpose. We disagree on that point, Maggie replied, maintaining the calm dignity Mei Lin had advised despite the rage simmering beneath. Patrick's death was neither tragic nor accidental. It was the deliberate silencing of a man who discovered fraud that threatens your entire empire. The direct accusation hung in the air between them. Blackwood's expression hardened his practiced charm, giving way to something colder and more authentic. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Sullivan," he said quietly. "Accusations of fraud and murder require extraordinary proof. Proof I don't believe you possess, despite your lawyer's careful implications." "The B&B marker still exists," Maggie replied, deciding that revealing their discovery might shake Blackwood's confidence. "Exactly where Patrick found it. Physical evidence of the original survey boundaries that prove your claims and your father's before you are built on deliberate fraud." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Blackwood's composure cracked entirely, his face paling before flushing with anger. "You've been trespassing on my property," he accused, rising halfway from his chair before mastering himself. "Technically, according to the original survey boundaries, we were on public land," Mei Lin corrected smoothly. "The marker's position establishes Miller Creek's true course, which places significant portions of what you claim as yours on territorial land or property belonging to others." Blackwood settled back into his chair, visibly recalculating his position. "Even if such a marker exists, which I neither confirm nor concede challenging established boundaries after decades of recognized ownership would create chaos throughout the region. The courts are generally reluctant to overturn settled property claims without overwhelming evidence and compelling public interest." "The territorial authorities might disagree," Mei Lin suggested, "particularly when the evidence includes not only the physical boundary marker, but documentation of systematic fraud perpetrated by your father and continued under your management." "Documentation," Blackwood repeated, his tone revealing genuine concern now. "What documentation?" Mei Lin smiled slightly, neither confirming nor denying the existence of such evidence. "As you noted earlier, accusations of this magnitude require extraordinary proof. Rest assured, we understand the burden before us." Blackwood's expression shifted through several calculations before settling into a mask of professional consideration. "It seems we have matters that might benefit from negotiation rather than adversarial proceedings," he said finally. "Perhaps an arrangement could be reached that addresses Mrs. Sullivan's concerns while avoiding the considerable expense and uncertainty of protracted legal battles." "We're open to discussion," Mei Lin acknowledged, "though any arrangement would need to fully address all aspects of our concerns, not merely financial compensation." Blackwood nodded, his businessman's instincts apparently overriding his initial anger. "Reasonable enough. I'll need time to consider the parameters of a potential settlement. Shall we reconvene tomorrow morning?" Same time. The request for delay was predictable. Blackwood needed time to investigate their claims, assess the extent of their evidence, and formulate countermeasures. But refusing would simply force him to take more drastic action immediately. "Tomorrow at 10, Mei Lin agreed, with the understanding that no actions will be taken regarding the Sullivan property or any relevant documentation until our discussions conclude." "Of course," Blackwood replied with a return to his practiced charm, merely a chance for both sides to consider their positions carefully. As they rose to leave, Blackwood added almost casually, "I understand you've been in contact with Sheriff Reynolds." The unexpected reference suggested Blackwood's information network was even more extensive than they'd assumed. Mei Lin neither confirmed nor denied the statement, merely observing, "The sheriff has official duties regarding property matters." "Indeed he does," Blackwood agreed, "though his jurisdiction is limited to enforcing existing legal determinations, not questioning them. A distinction sometimes lost on those with evolving loyalties." The veiled threat toward Reynolds was clear, as was the message that Blackwood was monitoring their movements and contacts carefully. "We'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Blackwood," Mei Lin concluded, guiding Maggie toward the door with a gentle pressure on her elbow. Blackwood's voice stopped them at the threshold. "One more thing, Mrs. Sullivan. That federal agent Grant. I'd be cautious about the information you share with him. Treasury agents have very specific mandates, and your personal justice isn't among them." The warning, so similar to concerns Mei Lin had already expressed, suggested Blackwood had his own sources regarding Grant's activities. Whether this represented a genuine caution or an attempt to sow discord among potential allies remained unclear. Outside the hotel, they maintained composed expressions until they had turned the corner onto a side street away from potentially observant eyes. "He knows about the marker," Maggie said once they were relatively private, "and he's worried about documentation we might have." "Yes," Mei Lin agreed, "but he's uncertain of exactly what we possess and how we intend to use it. That uncertainty gives us leverage." "He'll try to find the marker," Maggie predicted. "Remove it before we can document it officially." "Almost certainly, which is why we need to move quickly to secure Sheriff Reynolds' witness testimony." Mei Lin glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. "Our most immediate concern, however, is Grant. Blackwood's warning suggests he has information about the agent's activities that we don't. Or he's trying to prevent us from forming an alliance that would strengthen our position," Maggie countered. "Possibly both," Mei Lin acknowledged. "We should approach Grant cautiously, reveal our discovery, but not our full strategy, and assess his reaction before deciding how much to trust him." As they made their way back toward Clara's house, Maggie felt a strange mixture of triumph and trepidation. Their confrontation with Blackwood had confirmed the value of their discovery while simultaneously heightening the danger they faced. The game had entered a new phase, one where Blackwood would employ every resource at his disposal to neutralize their threat to his empire. Clara was waiting anxiously when they arrived, relief visible as they entered unharmed. "Meeting went as expected?" she asked, already preparing tea with her usual methodical care. "Blackwood knows we found the marker," Maggie confirmed. "He's worried, but trying to buy time, probably to locate and destroy the evidence before we can use it officially." "We need to contact Reynolds immediately," Mei Lin added. "Have him document the marker's existence before Blackwood's men remove it." Clara nodded, setting out cups with practiced precision. "Sheriff's wife visiting today. Medicine for lingering cough. I will send message through her." The indirect approach was wise. Blackwood would be watching Reynolds closely, now looking for signs of divided loyalty. A message passed through his wife would avoid immediate detection. "And Grant?" Clara asked, her perceptive gaze missing nothing of their concern. "You tell him of discovery." "Not yet," Mei Lin replied. "Blackwood issued a specific warning about the agent, suggesting he has information we don't. We need to approach that alliance carefully." As if summoned by the mention, a knock sounded at the door. Clara moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtain. "Agent Grant," she reported. "Alone appears." The timing was either remarkably convenient or suspiciously perfect. Mei Lin positioned herself slightly between the door and Maggie, a protective gesture that revealed more about her dedication to her client's safety than any words could express. Clara admitted Grant, who entered with the alert awareness of a man accustomed to assessing potential threats. He removed his hat, nodding respectfully to each of them. "Ladies, I apologize for the intrusion, but developments overnight suggest increased urgency in our mutual concerns." "What developments?" Mei Lin asked directly, her professional manner neither welcoming nor hostile. Grant's gaze assessed her with new interest, clearly noting her protective stance and direct approach. "Blackwood has sent telegrams to contacts in Helena and Denver. The content wasn't accessible to me, but the timing suggests he's mobilizing resources beyond Millbrook." "How do you know this?" Maggie asked, wondering at his access to such information. "I have an arrangement with the telegraph operator," Grant replied. "Nothing that compromises the content of private messages, but information about destinations and urgency." He glanced between them, noting their reserved responses. "You've had your own developments, I take it." Mei Lin and Maggie exchanged a look, silently debating how much to reveal. Clara, watching from near the stove, gave a small nod permission to proceed cautiously. "We've located physical evidence of boundary fraud," Maggie said finally. "An original survey marker that proves Blackwood's property claims are based on deliberately altered maps." Grant's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "That's significant, more concrete than financial paper trails or witness testimony." He seemed to be recalculating his approach based on this new information. "Where is this marker located?" "On what was Sullivan property?" Mei Lin replied, deliberately vague about the exact location. "We've documented its position and inscription, and are arranging for Sheriff Reynolds to provide official witness testimony to its existence." Grant nodded slowly, processing this information. "Reynolds is a calculated risk. His loyalty to Blackwood has been assumed rather than tested until now." He looked directly at Maggie. "Have you confronted Blackwood with this discovery?" "This morning," she confirmed. "He's offered to negotiate rather than face legal proceedings. We're scheduled to meet again tomorrow." "A delay tactic," Grant observed. "He'll use that time to locate and remove the marker, investigate the extent of your evidence, and prepare countermeasures." He paced a few steps, thinking aloud. "This changes my approach as well. Boundary fraud falls outside Treasury jurisdiction, but if connected to interstate banking activities and potential mineral rights fraud, it strengthens the overall case significantly." His transparency about jurisdictional limitations was either refreshingly honest or a careful calculation to gain their trust. Maggie remained uncertain which. "What exactly is your interest in Blackwood, Mr. Grant?" Mei Lin asked directly. "Beyond the general statement that you're investigating financial crimes across territorial lines." Grant considered her for a moment, apparently deciding how much to reveal. "Blackwood, or Harrington, as he was known in Colorado, has been systematically acquiring property with mineral potential using a combination of fraudulent banking practices and strategic foreclosures. The pattern spans 3 territories and involves millions of dollars in misappropriated funds." "And my husband's discovery threatened this pattern," Maggie said, the pieces fitting together more completely now. "Exactly," Grant confirmed. "Patrick Sullivan appears to have stumbled onto physical evidence that undermines the legal foundation of Blackwood's entire operation. From Blackwood's perspective, that made him extraordinarily dangerous." The frank acknowledgement of Patrick's murder, for that's what it was, regardless of official reports, validated Maggie's suspicions while deepening her resolve to secure justice. "Our interests align to a point," Grant continued. "We both want Blackwood held accountable for his crimes. Where we might diverge is in the specific charges and mechanisms of that accountability." "Meaning," Mei Lin prompted. "My primary focus is building a federal case that will stand up in court bank fraud, wire fraud, interstate commerce violations, charges with established precedent and clear jurisdictional authority." Grant's directness was oddly reassuring. Property boundary disputes and even potential murder charges would be handled at the territorial level with less certain outcomes given Blackwood's local influence. So you would prioritize financial crimes over justice for Patrick's death. Maggie stated, not as accusation, but clarification. I would pursue the charges most likely to result in Blackwood's conviction and imprisonment, Grant corrected gently. But I understand that specific justice for your husband's death is your primary concern. He spread his hands in a gesture of pragmatic openness. This is why I believe cooperation serves both our interests. Your boundary evidence strengthens my case by establishing a pattern of fraud, while my federal authority provides protection and resources you might otherwise lack. The assessment was fair and matched Mei Lin's earlier analysis of federal priorities. The question remained whether Grant's offer of alliance represented their best path forward or a potential complication to their more focused objectives. Before they could respond, Clara, who had been silently observing the exchange, spoke up unexpectedly. "My niece comes with a message," she said, moving to the window where she'd noticed a young boy running toward the house. "From Sheriff's wife." The interruption paused their discussion with Grant. Clara opened the door to admit a breathless child of perhaps 10, who delivered his message in a rush of excited importance. "Mrs. Reynolds says to tell you, the sheriff will be at the North Ridge at sunset. Alone. No official business." The boy looked expectantly at Clara, who pressed a cookie into his hand as reward for the successful delivery. After the messenger departed, they returned to the interrupted conversation with new urgency. Reynolds's willingness to meet them at the boundary marker that evening represented a crucial opportunity to document their discovery officially before Blackwood could eliminate the evidence. "Reynolds is taking a significant risk," Grant observed. "Blackwood will view any cooperation with you as betrayal, which is why we need to ensure the meeting proceeds without Blackwood's knowledge," Mei Lin replied. "His men will be searching the area, possibly with orders to remove the marker." Grant considered this decision apparently forming. "I can help with that. Create a diversion that draws Blackwood's attention elsewhere during your meeting with Reynolds." "Why would you do that?" Maggie asked, still uncertain of his ultimate priorities. "Because documented evidence of boundary fraud provides context for the financial crimes I'm investigating," Grant replied practically. "And because justice for Patrick Sullivan's death, while not my primary mandate, is not irrelevant to the larger case against Blackwood." The offer seemed genuine, though Maggie remained cautious about fully trusting Grant's objectives. She looked to Mei Lin, whose legal assessment would be valuable in this decision. "What kind of diversion?" Mei Lin asked, neither accepting nor rejecting the offer. "Information has reached me about irregularities in Blackwood's banking operations," Grant explained. "A formal inquiry from the Territorial Banking Commissioner arriving this afternoon would demand his immediate attention and likely draw his security personnel back to town." "You can arrange such an inquiry?" Maggie asked, impressed by the apparent extent of Grant's influence. "The Commissioner has been awaiting my signal to proceed," Grant confirmed. "The timing now seems appropriate given developments." The strategic alliance made practical sense, even if their ultimate objectives remained somewhat divergent. Reynolds's testimony about the boundary marker would strengthen both their property claim and Grant's larger case against Blackwood. "Very well," Mei Lin decided after a silent exchange of glances with Maggie and Clara. "We accept your assistance with tonight's meeting, but our primary focus remains securing Mrs. Sullivan's property rights and justice for her husband's death." "Understood," Grant acknowledged. "I'll arrange for the Banking Commissioner's inquiry to arrive by the afternoon stage. Blackwood will be occupied in town until well after dark." He replaced his hat, preparing to leave. One piece of advice: bring weapons tonight. Blackwood's men have been instructed to use whatever means necessary to protect his interests. The warning hung in the air as Grant departed, a sobering reminder that their pursuit of justice carried very real dangers. The boundary marker represented not just evidence in a property dispute, but a direct threat to Blackwood's entire criminal enterprise, an enterprise he had already demonstrated willingness to kill to protect. As they began preparations for the evening's crucial meeting with Reynolds, Maggie felt the weight of Patrick's watch in her pocket, a tangible connection to the man whose discovery had set these events in motion. Tonight would determine whether his death would lead to justice or simply become another buried truth in Millbrook's troubled history. The day stretched ahead, each hour bringing them closer to a confrontation that would reshape not just Maggie's future, but the foundation of power throughout the region. Silver veins hidden beneath disputed boundaries, decades of calculated fraud, lives sacrificed to maintain profitable deceptions, all would be exposed or buried forever by what transpired at sunset on the northern ridge. The end.